The wedding dress cost more than her father's stolen life's work. She wore it anyway. Camille Harrington walked into that Seoul ballroom knowing exactly who had burned her father's Manhattan office to ash. She was 31, a black corporate strategist from Harlem with a Wharton MBA and a memory that never blinked, silk press cascading past her waist, every smile calibrated, every breath a decision. The groom watched her from the altar. Jang Si-woo, 37, slicked back hair, black shirt open 2 buttons, a dragon tattoo climbing the left side of his neck, disappearing under the collar. The mafia boss who ran extortion on every container that touched Long Beach. He thought he was marrying a trophy, a quiet wife for his Bel Air mansion, someone to fold napkins and forget her last name. He did not know she had already read the manifests, already counted the shell companies, already opened a vault in Century City with her name on the key. For 3 years she poured his tea, copied his files, memorized 14 offshore accounts, smiled when he brought other women home, and when he finally sat her down to announce the divorce, the Russian oligarch's daughter, the new arrangement, the small allowance he was prepared to offer, she thanked him, asked for 48 hours to leave with dignity. He thought his black wife would beg. Instead, the mafia boss watched her walk up the stairs of another man's jet. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The knife was already at her throat when Camille Harrington remembered to breathe. Not a metaphor. An actual blade, cold and shallow against the soft hollow beneath her jaw, held there by a man in a black suit whose eyes did not blink. The Seoul dawn seeped gray through the tall windows of the Jang family compound in Pyeongchang-dong. Somewhere below, a Bentley idled. Somewhere above, a helicopter drifted low over the mountain. And somewhere in the next room, her wedding dress hung on a padded rack, ivory silk embroidered with 100 cranes. The man with the knife spoke Korean. Camille understood every word. "Test," he said. "The bride does not flinch." She did not flinch. She did not swallow. She let her eyes travel past his shoulder to the doorway, where Jang Si-woo stood watching, one hand in the pocket of his black wool trousers, the other resting loose at his side. His face carried no expression. His mouth was a straight line. His slicked back hair caught the weak morning light. The collar of his black shirt sat open 2 buttons deep, and the discreet black scales of the dragon tattoo curled along the left side of his neck like something asleep and hungry. He nodded, once. The knife withdrew. The bodyguard bowed and left. Camille lifted a hand, brushed a strand of long black hair back behind her ear, and smiled. It was the smile she had practiced for 6 weeks in the mirror of her father's shattered study. It was the smile of a woman who had already died and come back with a plan. "Good morning," she said, in Korean. Jang Si-woo did not smile back. He crossed the marble in 6 unhurried steps, stopped 1 meter from her, and studied her face the way a jeweler studies a stone before he decides whether to keep it or cut it. "Your Korean is better," he said, "since Tuesday." "I had time. You had 4 days. I used them." He tilted his head. Only a fraction. In another man, it would have been a shrug. In him, it was a full sentence, and the sentence was, "Interesting." Camille let him look. She was 31 years old, 5'8" in her bare feet, and she had grown up being looked at. She knew the geometry of her own face, oval, delicate, the cheekbones soft, the mouth full, and she knew what the long luxury silk press did when it fell past her waist in glossy layers, parted precisely down the middle. She wore a nude silk slip dress that stopped mid-calf, no jewelry except her mother's small gold studs. Her deep brown skin glowed in the pale light. She looked like a magazine editorial about serenity. She was not serene. 3 weeks earlier, Camille had walked into her father's office on the 22nd floor of a building in Century City and found her father crying at his desk. Reginald Harrington was 64 years old, a former federal prosecutor, a shipping law consultant with a spotless record and a corner suite. He was not a man who cried. When he lifted his face, she saw a bruise, the color of an old plum, spreading from his temple to the corner of his jaw. The office was in pieces, files on the floor, the Waterford decanter in a glittering starburst on the credenza, a photograph of her mother, glass smashed, face down. Two men in black suits stood in the corners with their hands folded in front of them. They were not moving. They did not need to. A third man sat in her father's leather chair. He wore a charcoal wool coat and had a small tattoo of a dragon on his neck, half hidden by his collar. He was reading her father's client ledger and taking notes in a small notebook with a silver pen. He did not look up when she walked in. Her father tried to stand. She placed a palm against his shoulder and eased him back down. The man at the desk closed the ledger. He wrote one final line. He capped the pen and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. Then he looked at Camille for exactly 3 seconds, and she understood two things in the space of those seconds. The first was that this was the man who had put the bruise on her father's face. The second was that he was going to marry her. He did not say so. He did not need to. 2 hours later, a courier arrived at her apartment in Brentwood, carrying a black envelope with a red wax seal. Inside were 3 documents: a marriage proposal drawn up by a firm she recognized from a sole directory, a copy of her father's outstanding debts to a shell company registered in Jeju, and a photograph of her mother's grave in Inglewood. The photograph had been taken that morning. There were fresh footprints in the grass. Camille had sat on the floor of her kitchen for 1 hour without moving. Then she had stood up, poured a glass of cold water, drunk it slowly, and opened her laptop. She began with the shell company. She followed the shell company to a second shell. She followed the second to a Panamanian trust. She followed the trust to a shipping conglomerate registered under a distant cousin's name at the port of Busan. By midnight, she had a diagram taped to her refrigerator with 16 boxes on it. By dawn, she had 18. She spent 4 days learning Korean phrases and the geography of Long Beach container terminals. On the 5th day, she signed the proposal in her father's kitchen while he watched, unable to speak. "You cannot do this," he had whispered. "Camille, you cannot. I already have. He will destroy you." She had leaned across the table and taken his hands. Her father's hands were cold, his fingers trembled. She held them steady. "Daddy," she said, "he already tried." Now, 6 days later, on the marble floor of a compound in Seoul, Jang Si-woo took one more step forward and stopped a hand's breadth from her. "You know why we are marrying," he said, in English now, low and precise. "Yes. Say it." She tilted her chin up. "Because my father's firm gave testimony in 2019 that cost your uncle a shipping license. Because the license was worth $800 million over 10 years. Because your family does not forget." His eyes narrowed. Only a fraction. She saw it. "And," he said, "and because I speak English, French, and passable Korean. Because I have a Wharton MBA. Because I understand maritime contracts. Because a wife who understands the business is more useful than one who does not. And a wife who is the daughter of the man who cost you $800 million is a guarantee that her father will never speak of your operations again." A long silence. "You did your reading," he said. "I did. You are not afraid." "I am terrified," Camille said. She held his eyes. "But I am also here. Both things are true." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not even a softening. A recalibration, as if a small instrument inside his skull had adjusted a decimal place. He lifted one hand and, with a single fingertip, touched the corner of her jaw where the knife had been. There was no residue there, no mark. He was checking anyway. "You did not flinch," he said. "I never do. We will see." He turned and walked out. At the doorway, he paused. Without looking back, he said, in Korean, "The dress is heavy. Do not let them lace it too tight. You will need to breathe for 6 hours." Then he was gone. Camille stood alone in the pale room with the smell of white peonies rising from a lacquer bowl on the console table. Somewhere in the walls a clock struck 7. Her knees, which had held all through the knife and the questions and the recalibration, chose that moment to almost give. She reached out and put one palm flat against the cool marble of a column and waited for her body to remember how to be a body. Then she straightened. She walked to the console. She poured herself a small cup of barley tea from a silver pot. She drank it in 3 even sips. She thought, 16 boxes, 18. By the end of this, I will have 50. The wedding was held that evening in a private hall behind a temple in Bukchon. 200 guests, half in hanbok, half in couture. A string quartet from Vienna, a soprano from Milan, cameras that were not allowed to record, champagne that no one drank quickly. Jiang Siwu wore a black three-piece suit with a white pocket square and a black silk tie. He did not smile once during the ceremony. His hand, when it took hers to slide the platinum band onto her finger, was warm and dry and did not tremble. Camille wore ivory silk embroidered with 100 cranes, a low chignon, and a single strand of freshwater pearls at her throat. She smiled the correct smile for exactly the correct amount of time. She spoke her vows in Korean without an accent. She let herself be photographed with his mother, his aunts, his 3 older cousins, the vice mayor of Seoul, and a man introduced only as Uncle Beck. Uncle Beck held her hand a beat too long and asked her, in English, whether she preferred Napa or Sonoma. She said Sonoma. He said, "Good answer," and released her. At the reception, she memorized 22 faces, 7 company names, 3 port cities, and a phrase Zhang's mother used twice on the phone in the corridor. Container 649, Long Beach, Thursday. She wrote none of it down. She did not need to. She had trained her memory for 6 weeks the way athletes train a lung. At 2 in the morning, they were driven through empty Seoul streets to a hotel suite overlooking the Han River. Jiang Siwu removed his jacket, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and stood at the window with his back to her. Camille sat on the edge of the bed in a white silk robe and unclipped her earrings one by one and set them in a small crystal dish. "You will live in Billionaire," he said, without turning. "You will manage the household. You will not ask about work. You will not receive guests I have not approved. You will not leave the country without my permission. You will attend 6 events per year at my side. Beyond that, your time is your own. Understood? You will not embarrass me. I have never embarrassed anyone." He turned. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, sat in the armchair opposite the bed, and unbuttoned one cuff. "You will sleep in the East Wing," he said. "I sleep in the West. The arrangement is not a marriage in the American sense. It is a treaty. Treaties can be pleasant. They can also be cold. Which do you prefer?" "Neither," Camille said. "I prefer to be useful." He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive. He nodded and returned to his whiskey and said nothing else that night. She lay awake in the east wing of the suite until the sky over the river turned the color of a bruise healing. Then she slept for 4 hours, exactly, and woke without an alarm. The house in Billionaire was white stone with a copper roof, set into a hillside behind a black iron gate. 9 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, a screening room, a wine cellar that ran the length of the tennis court, a staff of 11, a security detail of 6, a koi pond in the front courtyard, with fish older than Camille's marriage would ever be. She learned the house in 4 days. She learned the staff in 7. She learned which housekeeper had a daughter at UCLA on a scholarship her father had quietly arranged. She learned which driver had lost a nephew to a rival syndicate in 2018 and had come to work for Zhang out of what he called necessity and what Camille recognized as slow, patient rage. She learned which chef preferred to be called by his surname, and which preferred his given name, and which one preferred to be called nothing at all. She did not befriend any of them. She was warm. She was gracious. She learned the names of their children and remembered them across weeks. She wrote small notes when someone had a birthday. She did not ever, not once, ask any of them a question about her husband's business. But she watched. Zhang left the house every morning at 6:20. He returned some nights at 10, some nights not at all. He kept a study on the 2nd floor of the West Wing behind a door that used a biometric lock. Twice a week a courier arrived with a briefcase, and twice a week the briefcase left. Once a month a black car came at 3 in the morning and stayed for 40 minutes and left again. Camille did not go into the study. She did not need to. She had learned, in Seoul, that Zhang wrote everything down. He was a man who did not trust his own memory. He kept a small leather notebook in the breast pocket of his shirt. Every evening, before he showered, he transferred the day's notes from the leather book into a larger black ledger in the study. On Sundays, he burned the leather book's pages in the fireplace of the West Wing library and started a new one. The larger ledger stayed in the study behind the biometric lock. But the leather book, for those few minutes between his return home and his shower, sat on the marble counter in his dressing room while he removed his cufflinks and his shoulder holster and his wristwatch. The dressing room shared a wall with a linen closet. The linen closet had, in its ceiling, a small ventilation grate. The grate, when unscrewed, gave a clear view of the marble counter. Camille discovered this on the 11th day. She did not act on it for 6 months. She spent those 6 months being an exquisite wife. She hosted a dinner for the Korean consul general. She underwrote a wing of the Getty. She lunched with the wives of 3 studio heads and 2 hedge fund managers and remembered every child's name. She began to be photographed at charity events, always in muted silk, always with her long black hair a curtain of light, always at Jang's elbow, always 3/4 of a step behind him. She smiled, she smiled, she smiled. In private, she did 3 things. She studied Korean until she could follow rapid business dialect. She studied Mandarin because she noticed that half of Jang's phone calls were in Mandarin, and she studied from memory every scrap of shipping and customs law her father had ever taught her at the kitchen table when she was 11 years old, and thought maritime lien meant something you did with a boat and a rope. On the 183rd day of her marriage, Camille climbed into the linen closet at 7:14 in the evening, unscrewed the grate, and photographed 3 pages of Jang Si-woo's leather notebook with a small camera disguised as a fountain pen. She replaced the grate. She descended. She showered. She ate dinner across from her husband and asked him about the traffic on the 405. The 3 pages contained a container number, a date, 2 shell company names she already recognized, and a phone number with a Macau area code. That night, in the bathroom off her dressing room with the shower running and the exhaust fan roaring, Camille sat on the tile floor and typed the information into an encrypted file on a burner laptop she kept inside a hollowed volume of a book of Yeats' poems in her closet. She had 1 entry. By the end of the year, she had 94. By the end of the 2nd year, she had 462. Container numbers, dates, names of shell companies registered in Jeju, Panama, the British Virgin Islands, Delaware, Nevada, and a small canton in Switzerland. Phone numbers in Macau, Manila, Hong Kong, Vladivostok, and one, curiously, in a suburb of Buenos Aires. A pattern of extortion payments moving through a chain of import-export firms in Long Beach and San Pedro. 14 shell companies. She could draw the corporate diagram on a napkin without looking. She had drawn it 3 times at 3 different restaurants, and then torn each napkin into confetti and dropped the confetti in 3 different trash cans on the way home. She rented, under a name that was not hers, a small vault in a private bank in Century City, 6 blocks from her father's old office. She kept the dossier there, 400 pages, bound in black leather, indexed, cross-referenced, photographs where photographs existed, bank routing numbers, wire dates, amounts. Her father knew nothing about any of it. He believed she had chosen the marriage to save him and to save herself. He believed she was surviving. He grieved for her every Sunday afternoon when they had lunch on his patio in Culver City, and she let him grieve because grief was the only story that kept him from asking dangerous questions. Once, near the end of the 2nd year, he set his coffee cup down and looked at her and said, "You are different." How? Quieter. I have always been quiet. Not like this. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her father's hand was warmer now, steadier. He had begun to sleep through the night again. "Daddy," she said, "I am learning. That is all." Learning what? How to be a good wife. He looked at her a long time. He did not believe her, but he also did not press, because he was a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms, and he understood, better than most, that some witnesses will only testify when they are ready. He squeezed her fingers and let her go. By the middle of the 3rd year, the dossier had grown to 411 pages. Camille had memorized enough of it that she could have reconstructed 60% from scratch. She had identified, by name, 7 men she believed to be the operational spine of Jang's extortion operation on the Long Beach docks, and she had, from a distance, at charity events and gallery openings, made small, unmemorable pleasantries with 4 of them. She knew which one drank, which one had a mistress in Silver Lake, which one had a son with a learning difficulty, and would answer any woman who mentioned pediatric neurologists at Cedars. She had also, quietly, with money she had earned before the marriage and had kept out of Jang's reach, purchased a small nondescript office building in downtown Long Beach through a Nevada LLC with 3 layers of nominee ownership. The building had no tenant. It sat empty behind a chain-link fence and a leasing sign that had faded in the sun. It had a view of the container yard, She had not decided yet what she would do with it. She had time. She had, in fact, walked the perimeter of the building twice, on 2 separate afternoons, 6 weeks apart, in a rented gray sedan with California plates and a wig she had bought from a theatrical supply store in North Hollywood. On the first visit, she had measured the sight lines from the second-floor windows to the container yard using an optical rangefinder she had ordered under a false name. On the second visit, she had photographed the exterior at 3 different times of day, noting the shadows of the neighboring warehouses, the position of the security cameras on the adjacent block, and the frequency of the Port Authority patrols. She had left both times without speaking to a single person. The building was, she had decided, a chess piece. She did not yet know which square it would occupy, but she knew she would recognize the square when she saw it. She had learned, in 3 years of marriage to Jiang Siwu, that time was the one currency he did not know how to count. He counted money, he counted ships, he counted enemies and favors and hours of sleep. He did not count the small, quiet stretches when a woman with a Wharton MBA and a photographic memory and a father who had taught her maritime law at the kitchen table was allowed to sit alone in a 9-bedroom house on a hillside with the doors closed and the phones on silent and a burner laptop hidden inside a book of Yeats. He did not count those hours because he did not believe they mattered. That was his first mistake. His second, and Camille did not yet know this, although she would learn it, in 6 months, at a gala at the Getty Museum, standing beside a fountain with a glass of untouched champagne in her hand, was that he had begun, without noticing, to underestimate his wife by exactly the same margin every day. A small margin, almost invisible, but compounding. On the last evening of the 3rd year, Jiang came home at 11:40. He removed his jacket in the foyer and hung it on the walnut valet. He set his keys in the porcelain dish. He walked into the sitting room where Camille was reading a book about Portuguese trade routes in the 17th century, and he stopped, one hand on the back of an armchair, and looked at her. "You are beautiful tonight," he said. She lifted her head. She smiled. It was a small smile, warm at the edges. "Thank you." He looked at her a moment longer. Something moved behind his eyes. It was not tenderness. It was not suspicion. It was something closer to satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who has invested well and is beginning to see the return. "The Consul General's dinner is Saturday," he said. "Wear the pearl silk." "I will." He nodded and went upstairs. Camille turned a page. She did not read it. She was watching, in her peripheral vision, the doorway through which he had disappeared, and she was counting, in her head, the seconds until she heard the shower start in the west wing. 28 seconds. She marked the number in her memory beside 100 other numbers, closed the book, and stood up. The linen closet was quiet. The dressing room was warm. The leather notebook on the marble counter had 4 new pages. She photographed all 4. She replaced the grate. She descended. Somewhere in Century City, in a vault the size of a coffin, 411 pages waited for the 412th. Somewhere in downtown Long Beach, an empty building waited behind a chain-link fence. Somewhere in a private airfield in Van Nuys that Camille had never yet visited, a hangar sat under a corrugated roof, its doors closed, its purpose unknown to her, though she would learn it, soon enough, from a man in a graphite suit with silver at his temples and eyes the color of a winter sea. She did not know yet that his name was Alexander Whitmore. She did not know yet that she would need him. She only knew, that night, standing in her own bathroom with the shower running and the exhaust fan roaring and a fountain pen full of photographs cooling in her palm, that she was no longer a woman who had been broken. She was a woman who had been building, and the thing she was building was almost ready. She turned the shower off. She combed out her long, dark hair. She braided it loose down her back. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The deep brown skin, the delicate mouth, the eyes that did not blink. And she said, aloud, in a voice so soft it did not reach the walls, 6 months. Then she turned off the light. The Getty Gala was held on a Saturday in late October, and Camille had been planning her arrival for 11 weeks. She did not tell Jiang she was going. She did not need to. The invitation had come to the house in a heavy cream envelope addressed to Mrs. Jiang Si-woo, and she had opened it at the breakfast table while he read the shipping reports on his phone, and she had said, without looking up, that the museum wanted a donation for the new photography wing. He had grunted. He had told her to write the check. He had not asked what evening she planned to attend. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was assuming she would go alone. She did not go alone. She went with a woman named Priya Nadeau, a curator at the Getty who had spent the last 4 months quietly cultivating Camille's friendship over lunches at San Vicente bungalows and long walks through the sculpture garden. Priya believed Camille was a bored heiress with a good eye for Kehinde Wiley. Camille had let her believe it. Priya's husband sat on 3 boards with Alexander Whitmore. Priya had already, without knowing she was being used, placed Camille at Whitmore's table for the seated dinner. Table 4, seat 7, 2 chairs from the man himself. Camille chose the dress 6 weeks in advance. Nude silk, floor length, cut on the bias so that it moved when she moved and stilled when she stilled. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The dress said serious woman. The dress said, do not underestimate the mouth that will speak to you in an hour. She wore her hair down, the long silk press falling past her waist, one side tucked behind her ear to reveal a single small diamond stud. No necklace, her collarbones did the work. She arrived at 7 minutes past 8. She let Priya lead her through the receiving line. She smiled at 3 trustees and 1 senator's wife. She drank half a glass of champagne and did not finish it. She listened. She let the room turn its attention elsewhere. And then, at 8:43, when the crowd began to drift toward the seated dinner and the lights above the sculpture court dimmed by a measured degree, she walked, unhurried, toward the small alcove where Alexander Whitmore was standing alone in front of a Rothko on loan from a private collection. She had studied him for 2 years. She knew the way he stood, weight on his left leg, right hand loose at his side, left hand holding the stem of his glass between 2 fingers. She knew he preferred bourbon to champagne and drank it neat. She knew his second wife had died in a sailing accident off Sardinia and he had never remarried. She knew he collected first editions of Melville and Conrad, and she knew he had, 3 years earlier, spent $41 million in a proxy fight to break a shipping cartel operating out of Oakland. She knew who he hated, and she knew who he watched. She walked up beside him and stopped a polite half-step to his right, not close enough to intrude, close enough to be seen. She looked at the Rothko. She did not look at him. Number 14, she said. 1961. It sold at Sotheby's in 2012 for $86.9 million. It is on loan from a foundation in Zurich that does not exist. Whitmore did not turn his head. He took a slow sip of his bourbon. The foundation exists, he said. The foundation is registered, Camille said. That is not the same as existing. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Then Alexander Whitmore turned, slowly, and looked at her for the first time. His eyes were the color of wet slate. They took her in without hurry, without appetite, without judgment. They read her the way a man reads a page of a book he has already decided to buy. Mrs. Jang, he said. Ms. Harrington, she said. Camille. Camille. He inclined his head half an inch. You know who I am. I know precisely who you are, Mr. Whitmore. I have known who you are for a long time. And what would you like to say to me, precisely? I would like to say 4 sentences, she said. If, after the 4th sentence, you tell me to leave, I will leave, and neither of us will ever mention this conversation again. If you tell me to stay, we will find somewhere quieter than this alcove, and I will show you something. He tilted his head, the smallest fraction. He did not smile. But something in the set of his mouth changed. Not amusement, not surprise, something older, something like recognition. He gestured with his glass, very slightly, for her to continue. My husband, Camille said, controls the extortion of 41% of the container traffic through Long Beach and San Pedro. He has done so for 6 years. He has done so through 14 shell companies whose ownership terminates in 3 trusts in Jeju and 1 in the Caymans. I have the manifests, the wire transfers, the Port Authority bribe schedule, and the names of every longshoreman on his payroll. I have 400 pages. I have originals, and I am prepared to give all of it to you, in exchange for an equal partnership in whatever you build on the rubble. She stopped. She did not blink. She did not smile. She waited. Alexander Whitmore looked at her for a long time. Somewhere behind them, a woman laughed at something. A waiter passed with a tray of empty glasses. The Rothko burned red and black against the wall. Equal, Whitmore said, at last. Equal, Camille said. 50-50. On paper, in every jurisdiction, my name on the operating agreements, my signature on the wire authorizations, 2 votes on the board, one of which is mine, and a tiebreaker mechanism that runs through a neutral trustee I will choose. You have thought about this. I have thought about very little else for 3 years. Why me? Because you tried once already, in Oakland, and you almost did it. Because you understand shipping, because you have the balance sheet to withstand a 2-year war, and because you are the only man in this city whom my husband is genuinely afraid of, and does not know he is afraid of. He is afraid of me. He mentions your name 3 times a week. He does not know he does it. I have counted. Whitmore's mouth moved, not a smile, a quarter of a smile, a recognition of technique. He set his glass down on the ledge beneath the Rothko. He took a small step closer. He was still not touching her. He did not need to. Come with me, he said. There is a room on the 2nd floor. They walked. Priya, across the court, watched them go and mistook it for what she wanted to see. 2 men from Whitmore's security detail closed silently behind them and stayed at a distance of 8 paces. The 2nd floor room was a private viewing gallery, wood-paneled, lit by 2 brass sconces, empty except for a Vermeer that was not supposed to be in Los Angeles. Whitmore closed the door himself. He did not lock it. Show me, he said. Camille opened the small clutch she carried. She removed a single sheet of paper, folded once. She unfolded it. She placed it on the small table beneath the Vermeer. It was a schematic, hand-drawn, in her own hand, on architect's vellum. 22 terminals along the Long Beach and San Pedro complex. Each terminal marked with a code, each code corresponding to one of the 14 shell companies. Each shell company traced by 3 arrows to a monthly cash flow, in 6-figure and 7-figure sums, all totaled at the bottom of the page. The total was $147 million annually. Off the books, untaxed, untraceable, until now. Whitmore looked at it for 2 full minutes. He did not touch it. He read it the way a general reads a map on the morning of a battle. This is 1 page, he said. There are 399 more, Camille said, in a vault at Century City. I have the only key. There is a 2nd copy in a bank in Toronto. There is a 3rd with an attorney in London who does not know what he is holding. If anything happens to me between now and the day we sign, all 3 copies are released simultaneously to the FBI, the Treasury, the Korean National Police Agency, and 3 journalists at 3 different newspapers. I have already written the cover letters. When were you going to release them anyway? I am not going to release them, Camille said. I am going to give them to you, and you and I are going to use them, together, at a moment we choose, in a sequence we choose, in a way that leaves us both standing and no one else in the room. And your husband? She did not answer immediately. She looked at the Vermeer. A woman at a window, reading a letter. The light on her face was very old and very patient. My husband, Camille said, put his hand around my throat 6 times in 3 years. He mailed a photograph of my father's destroyed office to my mother's house with no return address. He believes I am furniture. He believes I fold when told to fold. He is going to learn otherwise. I would prefer he learn it from a man he can respect, rather than a woman he cannot see. Whitmore was silent. You want me to be the mirror, he said. I want you to be the doorway, Camille said. I will be the mirror. He picked up the sheet of vellum. He folded it once. He placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked at her again, and this time there was something in his face that had not been there before. Not warmth, not desire, something rarer than either. It was the face a man makes when he meets, for the first time in a long time, someone whose mind he does not have to slow down to speak with. I will need 2 weeks, he said, to verify, to build the entity, to move the capital. When I am ready, I will send you a signal. It will be a single word delivered in a way you cannot mistake. What word? Tarmac. She felt her heartbeat, once, distinct and slow. Tarmac, she said. When you see it, you will have 72 hours to leave the house on your own terms. You will land in a jurisdiction I choose. You will bring nothing from that house except yourself. Do you understand? I understand. One more question, Miss Harrington. Yes. Why 50-50? Why not 60? You have the leverage. You could ask for 60. Camille smiled, for the first time that evening. It was a very small smile, and it did not reach her eyes, and it was the smile of a woman who had rehearsed every part of this negotiation in her own head so many times that the answers came the way breath came. Because 60, she said, would tell you I am afraid of you, and I am not. And you need to know I am not, because we are going to be in rooms together for a long time. Whitmore looked at her. Whitmore laughed. Once. A short, dry laugh, more exhalation than sound. Then he offered her his arm, formally, the way a man offers his arm to a woman he intends to walk in to dinner beside. Ms. Harrington, he said, may I escort you to the table? They walked back downstairs. She sat 2 chairs from him. She ate 3 bites of the halibut. She let a trustee's wife tell her about a house in Provence. She did not look at Whitmore again for the rest of the evening. She did not need to. The vellum was in his pocket. The word had been chosen. The doorway had opened by exactly the width required to walk through. She was home in Bel-Air by 12:40. Zhang was in his study. He did not ask where she had been. She did not tell him. She went upstairs and she washed her face and she lay down beside him in the vast cold bed and she did not sleep for 3 hours and she did not move once and she did not smile. She was not afraid. She was counting. She did not sleep that night either. She lay awake in the dark beside Zhang and she listened to his breathing and she counted the beats of her own pulse against the pillow and she rehearsed, in her mind, the sequence of the next 8 days as though she were rehearsing a piano concerto. The vault at Century City, the wire to Toronto, the second passport in the safe deposit box in Pasadena under her mother's maiden name, the 3 burner phones, each pre-programmed with a single number, the letter to the attorney in London, sealed and dated 3 weeks earlier, sitting in a drawer that would be opened only if she failed to send a check-in text on the correct day of the correct month. Nothing had been left to improvisation. Nothing. The next morning she rose at 6. She dressed in a pale gray silk dress and low pearl earrings. She drove herself, alone, to a coffee shop in Culver City that she had never entered before and would never enter again. She ordered a black coffee. She sat by the window. At 6:32, a woman she had met exactly twice in her life sat down across from her, slid a manila envelope across the table, drank a single mouthful of espresso, stood up, and left. Camille opened the envelope in her car. Inside was a printed page confirming, in the dry language of a compliance memo, that a Delaware LLC named Meridian Harbor Holdings had been incorporated 4 days earlier, with 2 members of equal stake, and that the first tranche of capital, $90 million, had cleared into escrow at a private bank in Grand Cayman. Her name was on the second signature line. She read the page twice. She folded it. She burned it in the ashtray of the car with the cigarette lighter she had never once used. She ground the ash between her fingers and let the wind take it. She drove home. She poured Zhang a glass of the Bordeaux he liked. She listened to him complain about a longshoreman he was going to have replaced. She nodded in the correct places. She refilled his glass. She kissed the corner of his mouth when he stood up to take a call, and she felt, as her lips touched his skin, absolutely nothing, and she understood, with a clarity she had not permitted herself in 3 years, that she was already gone. 8 days passed. On the 9th day, at 9 in the morning, a courier arrived at the house in Bel-Air with a small package addressed to Camille. It was a book, a first edition of Moby Dick, bound in dark green leather. The card inside said, in a hand she had never seen before, "For your collection, A.W." She turned to the flyleaf. Someone had written, in pencil, in the upper right corner, 1 word, tarmac. She closed the book. She smiled, very briefly, at the wall. She went to her dressing room and she began, quietly and methodically, to pack a single small suitcase of the things she was going to take with her and the things she was going to leave behind forever. She did not know, on the 9th day, that Zhang was going to speak first. She found out on the 10th day. He came home at 7 in the evening. She was in the kitchen with the housekeeper, arranging figs on a plate. He walked in without taking off his coat. He stood in the doorway. He looked at her the way he looked at a shipping report that had come in below projection. He said her name, Camille. Yes. Send her out. The housekeeper set down the knife and left without a word. Camille finished arranging the figs. She did not turn around. I have something to tell you, Zhang said. Tell me. I am filing for divorce. She placed the last fig on the plate. She set the knife down beside it, precisely parallel to the edge of the board. She wiped her hands on a linen towel. She turned around. She looked at him. Her face did not change. "On what grounds?" she said. "Irreconcilable differences. It will be clean. My attorneys will handle the paperwork. You will receive the settlement stipulated in the prenuptial. 6 million. The house in Marina del Rey. The Range Rover. You will vacate this residence within 72 hours. May I ask why? I am marrying Anastasia Volkov. In 11 weeks. In Seoul." She let a beat pass. She let her face do exactly what she had trained it to do for 3 years, which was almost nothing. "Volkov," she said. "Sergei Volkov's daughter." "Yes. Congratulations." He watched her. He was waiting for it. The crack, the tremor, the wet eyes, the question, the plea. He had watched women receive news like this his entire life. He knew the shape of what came next. He was already, in the back of his mind, calculating how long it would take her to reach the tears and how much longer to reach the bargaining. She smiled. It was a small, warm, gracious smile. It was the smile of a hostess whose guests were leaving a little earlier than expected, but had had a lovely time. "Thank you," she said. He blinked. "Thank you," she said again, "for telling me directly. That was more consideration than I expected." "Camille, I would like to ask one favor." He did not answer. 48 hours, she said. "Instead of 72, I will be out in 48. I would prefer to leave on a Wednesday. I have always found Wednesdays easier. I will take nothing that is not on the prenuptial list. My attorney will confirm receipt of the settlement by the end of business Friday. I would ask, only, that you not be present in the house when I leave. It would embarrass us both." He stared at her. "That is what you want to say to me," he said. "That is what I want to say to you. You have nothing else." "I have 3 years of gratitude," she said, "for a marriage that taught me exactly the kind of woman I did not want to remain. I do not think you will understand what that means. I do not require that you understand. I wish you and Ms. Volkov every appropriate happiness." There was a very long silence. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the quarter hour. He looked at her, and he looked, for the first time in 3 years, as though he did not quite know what he was looking at, and then his face closed again, and he nodded, once, small and dismissive, and he turned, and he walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to his study, and he shut the door. She stood alone at the counter. She looked down at the plate of figs. She picked up one, and she ate it slowly, and she chewed, and she swallowed, and she felt the sweetness of it on her tongue, like the first sweetness she had tasted in 3 years. She wiped her hands on the linen towel. She folded the towel. She placed it on the counter. She went upstairs. She passed his study without pausing. She went into her dressing room. She closed the door. She locked it. She sat down on the small velvet bench in front of the mirror. She looked at her own face for a long moment, the deep brown skin, the delicate mouth, the long silk press falling forward over one shoulder, the eyes that had not blinked when he told her he was replacing her with a 19-year-old daughter of a Russian oligarch in Seoul in 11 weeks. She said, softly, in a voice so low it did not reach the door, 48 hours. She reached for her phone. She opened a blank message. She wrote 3 words to a number that had been given to her the previous week, through a chain of 3 intermediaries, and 1 dead drop in a parking garage in Culver City. She wrote, "We accelerate. Wednesday." She hit send. The reply came within 90 seconds. 3 words. Confirmed. Gulfstream ready. It was signed only with the letter A. She set the phone face down on the vanity. She permitted herself for exactly 1 second to close her eyes. Then she opened them, and she began the work of the next 48 hours in her head, in the exact order she would perform it. Wire authorization to Toronto at 9 tomorrow morning. Vault at Century City at 11. Attorney in Beverly Hills at 1. Second attorney in Pasadena at 3. Passport retrieval at 4. Personal packing between 6 and midnight. Sleep from midnight to 5. Departure to Van Nuys at 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning, in a car she would order from a service Jang did not know she used, driven by a driver whose name she had never asked and never would. She thought about her father. She thought about the phone call she would make to him from 28,000 feet somewhere over the Rockies, once the plane had crossed the state line, and there was no longer anything Jang could do. She thought about the way her mother would cry, softly, at the other end of the line, and the way her father would say almost nothing, and the way, at the very end of the call, he would clear his throat and say her name, and she would know, from the single syllable, that he understood, that he had understood, perhaps for a long time. She thought about Whitmore. She did not think about him for long. He was a doorway. He would remain a doorway. She had been extremely precise about the terms, and he had accepted them without a single modification, and that told her everything she needed to know about the kind of partner he would be. He would not touch her. He would not want to. He was building an empire, and he had recognized, across a museum floor, the one weapon he had not been able to buy anywhere else: a woman who knew the inside of the enemy's house from 3 years of walking its halls barefoot. He would use her. She would use him. They would both walk out of it richer, quieter, and permanently untouchable. That was the deal. That was the whole deal. Then she stood up, and she went to the closet, and she began to pack the second, smaller suitcase, the one she had not yet allowed herself to touch, the one that held, at the bottom, folded in tissue paper, the champagne gold dress in Italian silk that she had commissioned 4 months earlier from a small atelier in Milan, under a false name, paid for in cash, routed through a Toronto account he did not know existed. She lifted the tissue paper. She looked at the dress. The color caught the light from the closet lamp and turned, briefly, into something that looked almost like fire. She smiled. This time the smile reached her eyes. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a woman who has spent 1,095 days waiting for the door to open, and who now hears, faintly, on the other side of it, the sound of a key turning in a lock she did not have to touch. She closed the suitcase. She turned off the light. She walked back to the bedroom, and she lay down beside her husband, and she slept, for the first time in 3 years, without dreaming. The 48 hours Camille had asked for began at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she used the first 4 minutes of them to walk down the marble corridor of the Bel Air mansion, without letting her heels click too loudly. Zhang was still in the study behind her. His signature was still fresh on the divorce draft his lawyers had drawn up in Korean and English. The Russian oligarch's daughter, a woman named Anastasia Volkov, was scheduled to land at LAX in 9 days. None of that mattered anymore. Camille walked past the portrait of Zhang's grandfather without looking at it. She had looked at that painting for 3 years. She was done looking. Upstairs, in the dressing room he had renovated for her the first month of the marriage, she opened the closet where the Seda midi dresses hung in perfect gradients of nude and off-white and pearl gray. She touched none of them. She reached instead to the back, past the last hanger, and pulled out a garment bag that had been there for 11 days. Inside was the champagne gold gown, Italian silk, bias cut, a shade lighter than her collarbones, a shade darker than her skin, caught in candlelight. She had ordered it the morning after the Getty Gala, before she had even finished her coffee. The clutch and the sandals were already in a suitcase downstairs. The long cream coat was folded on the chair by the door. She had known, 3 years ago, that the ending would require a costume change. She did not put the gown on yet. She sat on the edge of the ivory chaise and opened her laptop and typed a single email to a woman named Denise Park at Century City. Denise was her attorney. Denise had been waiting for this email since May. The subject line was 3 characters. The body was 2 sentences. Denise wrote back in 90 seconds. The dossier was already in motion. The 400 pages would be in the hands of a federal prosecutor named Ruben Ortiz by Thursday afternoon. Camille closed the laptop. She did not smile. Smiling was for later. At 1:14 a.m., she went downstairs in a plain black robe and made herself tea in the kitchen, where she had memorized, over 3 years, exactly which cabinets Zhang's men searched during their weekly sweeps. She drank the tea standing up. She thought about her father. She thought about the office in Baltimore with the glass door that had been blown inward and the accounting binders that had been dumped in the parking lot, and the 6 months her father had spent trying to keep her mother from learning how bad it was before the pancreatic cancer took him anyway. She did not cry. She had cried in year 1. She had bargained in year 2. In year 3, she had memorized shell company names. She finished the tea. She rinsed the cup. She placed it upside down on the rack, the way the housekeeper preferred it. At 2:03 a.m., Alexander Whitmore's private line rang once, and he picked up. He did not say hello. He said, "The Gulfstream is fueled. Van Nuys, Signature Aviation, Gate C." Wheels up at 9:40 on Thursday morning. I will be on board. Camille said thank you and hung up. Alexander was not a man who required conversation. That was one of the many things that made him useful. Wednesday, she moved with the discipline of a woman who had practiced this in her head every night for 11 months. She let the housekeeper come at 8. She let the tailor come at 10 to make a small adjustment to a jacket she would never wear again. She had lunch on the patio with Zhang's aunt, a thin woman named Mrs. Bay who had never liked her and never would, and she smiled at Mrs. Bay's stories about the Volkov girl and complimented the older woman's earrings and let herself be gently insulted 3 times without flinching. When Mrs. Bay left, Camille went upstairs and washed her face and reapplied her makeup. Then she called the vault in Century City and confirmed that the second courier had picked up the 14 sealed envelopes at 11 that morning. Everything was moving. Nothing was visible. Zhang came home at 7. He walked past her in the hall and did not look at her. He went straight to the study and closed the door. She heard him on the phone in Korean, low and clipped, arranging the flowers for the Volkov engagement announcement. She stood in the hallway for a full minute listening. Then she walked upstairs and packed the last 3 items into the suitcase. Her mother's rosary, the photograph of her father at his desk, a single flash drive the size of a fingernail. She slept 4 hours. She woke at 5. At 6:12 a.m. on Thursday, she stood in front of the full-length mirror in the dressing room and put on the champagne gold gown for the first time. The silk moved against her like water finding its own level. She looked at herself for a long moment. 31 years old, marrow-deep tired. Alive in a way she had not been in a very long time. She slid the diamond studs into her ears. She fastened the thin diamond bracelet on her right wrist. She stepped into the gold sandals. She picked up the cream clutch. She draped the long cream coat over her shoulders without putting her arms through the sleeves. She did not look at the closet full of nude and off-white dresses. She walked past them and out the door. Zhang was in the kitchen drinking espresso from the tiny cup he preferred. He was in his black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and the collar open at the throat where the dragon's first scale was visible. He looked up when she came in. He did not say anything for perhaps 3 seconds. His face did not move. His eyes did. "Where are you going?" he said. It was not a question. It was a flat statement said in the register of a man who was not accustomed to asking. "Out," Camille said. "As agreed." "That is not a dress for out. It is a dress for the last day." He set the espresso down. The cup made no sound. "Camille." She looked at him. She let herself look at him for the first time in the whole marriage without the mask. She did not glare. She did not soften. She simply looked, the way a woman looks at a building she used to work in. "Goodbye, Sai Wu," she said. She walked out. The car was already in the drive. The driver was a man named Marcus that Alexander had sent. Marcus opened the door without a word. Camille slid into the back seat. The coat settled around her shoulders. The clutch settled on her lap. She did not look back at the house. She had already looked at it enough for a lifetime. The drive from Bel Air to Van Nuys Airport took 27 minutes at that hour. Camille used those 27 minutes to check her phone twice. First message, Denise Park, 6:41 a.m. Ortiz has the file. Warrants signed at 5:30. Task force is moving. Second message, Alexander Whitmore, 6:44 a.m. On board. Coffee is fresh. We fly when you arrive. She did not reply to either. She put the phone face down on the leather seat beside her and watched Los Angeles smear past the window in soft gold and gray. Signature Aviation at Van Nuys was quiet in the way private terminals are always quiet, the hush of a place where money has arranged for silence. Marcus drove the car directly onto the tarmac past a guard who nodded once. The Gulfstream G650 sat on the apron with its stairs down and its engines already whispering. The morning sun caught the fuselage and threw a white line along the length of it. Camille stepped out of the car. The coat slid down her shoulders half an inch. She let it. She walked toward the stairs in the gold sandals across the black tarmac, and the champagne gold silk moved with her stride like a slow signal fire. At the bottom of the stairs she paused. She did not know why. Something in her chest asked her to pause. She turned her head slightly to the left, toward the gate she had come through, and there, 300 feet away on the other side of the chain link, was the black Mercedes Maybach she recognized. Zhang was standing outside the driver's side door. He had not come around the fence. He was not going to. He was simply standing there, in his black shirt and his black trousers and his slicked back hair, with the dragon on his neck visible in the morning light, and he was watching her. Camille did not wave. She did not smile. She looked at him for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned back to the stairs and walked up them, one hand on the rail, the coat trailing, the gown catching the sun. At the top of the stairs, Alexander was standing in the doorway with a small coffee cup in his hand and an expression that was very close to, but not quite a smile. He stepped aside. She walked past him into the cabin. He gave a small nod to someone behind her. The stairs began to retract. On the tarmac, 300 feet away, Jiang Siwu watched the door of the Gulfstream close. That was the last thing he saw before his phone started. The first call came at 7:22 a.m. It was his lieutenant at the port of Long Beach. His voice was tight in a way Jiang had never heard from him. Federal agents, 12 containers, warrants. They had the manifests. They had the names. They had the routing numbers. They had photographs of Jiang's cousin signing the paperwork. Jiang stood on the tarmac with the phone to his ear and watched the Gulfstream begin to taxi. He did not interrupt. He listened. The second call came at 7:24 a.m. It was his accountant. 3 shell companies had been frozen, not seized, frozen, which meant the Treasury Department had been building for weeks, which meant somebody had walked them a map. The third call came at 7:26 a.m. It was his lawyer. 2 of his mid-tier captains had been arrested at their homes at 5:45 that morning. One of them had already asked for a deal. The other had not asked for one yet. It was only a matter of hours. The fourth call came at 7:29 a.m. It was the head of his security detail. Someone had accessed the vault in the study at 5 a.m. Someone had photographed the ledger. Someone had left the ledger exactly where it belonged and closed the safe. Someone had known the code. Jiang looked down at his phone. The Gulfstream was in the air now, a silver splinter climbing over the San Fernando Valley into a sky the color of new denim. He did not curse. He did not throw the phone. He stood on the tarmac in his black shirt in the 7:30 sun, and he did the arithmetic in his head. 3 years, 14 companies, 400 pages, 1 woman, 1 dress the color of champagne. He understood, that moment, with the cold clarity of a man who had spent his entire adult life understanding these things about other men, that he had not been betrayed. He had been outplanned. There is a difference. Betrayal is emotional. Planning is architectural. His wife had built a building around him for 3 years, and this morning she had walked out of it and locked the door. His driver stepped out of the Maybach. Boss. Jiang held up one finger. His driver went silent. He watched the plane disappear into the blue for another 13 seconds. Then he turned and got into the back of the car. Century City, he said. Sir, the office is... Not the office. Denise Park's building now. Inside the Gulfstream, Camille sat in a cream leather chair beside a small oval window and watched Los Angeles fall away underneath her. Alexander sat across from her, one leg crossed over the other, a folder open on his knee. He said nothing for the first 10 minutes. He had learned, at the Getty 3 months earlier, that Camille preferred silence when she was calibrating. She calibrated now, watching the coast slide east under the wing, watching the container terminals at Long Beach shrink into a grid of colored dots, watching one of those grids where she knew, because she had drawn it, the federal task force was at that moment moving in. At 8:04 a.m., over Nevada, she opened the folder Alexander had left on the small table between them. It was the partnership agreement, 50-50, voting parity, board seats matched 2 for 2 with an independent chair to be jointly appointed. Her name was on every page in ink already. His was there too. Their attorneys had spent 6 weeks building the language. She flipped to the signature page. He had already signed his line. She uncapped the pen he had left resting across the folder and signed hers. It took her 3 seconds. She closed the folder and slid it back across the table. Alexander looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "You understand this means you now own 31% of a shipping infrastructure that Jiang's operation has been quietly extorting for 11 years. I understand, Camille said. You understand he will read that as an act of war. He will read it as an act of war until he reads the FBI's evidence log. Then he will read it as something else. Which is? An eviction. Alexander allowed himself the smile now. It was small, and it did not last long. He tapped the folder twice with one finger. You know, he said, When you came to me at the Getty and offered me the ports, I thought you were the smartest woman in the room. I was wrong. You were the smartest person in the room. I have been thinking about that for 3 months. I wanted you to know." Camille inclined her head very slightly. She did not thank him. Thanks were for men who required them. Alexander did not. "There is one more thing," she said. "Of course there is." She reached into the cream clutch on the seat beside her and took out the flash drive. She set it on the table between them. It was small enough to be lost in a napkin. "What is on it?" Alexander said. "The other 7 shell companies. The ones I did not give the FBI." "Why did you not give them to the FBI?" "Because they are the ones that touch Whitmore Holdings from 2019 to 2021. 2 payments. Both indirect. Both deniable. I am not going to hand a federal prosecutor a rope for my new business partner's neck in the same month I am asking him to trust me." Alexander looked at the flash drive for a long moment. Then he looked at her. His face did not move, but something inside his eyes shifted. "You could have used that as leverage," he said. "I know. Why did you not?" "Because I do not want a partner I have to threaten. I want a partner who understands, before we ever board a plane together, that I do not need to threaten him. There is a difference between the two. It matters." Alexander picked up the flash drive. He turned it once between his thumb and forefinger. Then he set it back down, closer to her side of the table than his. "Keep it," he said. "I intended to. Not as leverage, as history." "Understood." He nodded once. That was all. The plane climbed into a higher, colder blue. In Century City, Jung Si-woo walked into the lobby of a black glass tower at 8:47 a.m., alone, with no bodyguard, in his black shirt, and asked the concierge for the floor of Park & Associates. The concierge did not recognize him. That was intentional. Jang had walked past this building 40 times in 3 years without ever looking up at it. He rode the elevator to the 34th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area of pale wood and glass. A woman in a gray suit stood up. "Mr. Jang." He blinked. It was the only thing his face did. "Miss Park is expecting you," she said. He followed her down a hallway to a corner office. Denise Park stood behind her desk. She was tall, 48, Korean-American, in a black pantsuit with a jade brooch. She did not offer her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Jang." He sat. "Your wife anticipated that you would come here this morning," Denise said. "Not to my office specifically. To this building. She left instructions with me, 11 days ago, in the event you did. Would you like to hear them?" Jang said nothing, which she took as yes. "First, you will not be permitted to see her, speak to her, or contact her directly until further notice. All communication will pass through this office. Second, if you attempt to contact her family in Baltimore, her mother, her aunt, her cousin, or any of the 6 close friends whose names she gave me, this office will file a temporary restraining order by noon the same day, and the accompanying press release will name you. Third." She paused. "Third, she said to tell you that she is not angry." Jang breathed in once through his nose. "Fourth," Denise continued, "she said if you would like to arrange a professional conversation, in a neutral location, in 6 to 8 weeks, once your legal situation has stabilized enough that you can travel, and once her own schedule permits, she will consider it. She would like you to understand that she is not saying no to a conversation. She is saying, not this month, not this week, not on the tarmac of an airport, and not in the tone of a man who lost." "I have not lost." Denise looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Jang, 12 containers were seized this morning. 2 of your captains will sign cooperation agreements by end of business today. The Treasury Department has been building for 11 weeks. Your father-in-law's records are with a federal prosecutor named Ruben Ortiz, who has already convened a grand jury in the District of Maryland. You have, at last count, roughly 17 days before an indictment is unsealed with your name on it." Jang looked at her. "You have lost," Denise said. "You have not been destroyed. There is a difference. Your wife made sure of that difference. That was a decision she made. She could have destroyed you. She chose not to." Jang was silent for a very long moment. "Why?" he said finally. Denise closed the folder in front of her. "That is not a question I am authorized to answer. If you want an answer to it, you will earn the meeting in 6 to 8 weeks. And when you sit across from her, Mr. Jang, you will not sit across from your wife. You will sit across from a woman who owns 31% of a company that, as of this morning, is expanding into the exact port infrastructure your organization used to run. You understand what that means? Yes. Say it. Zhang's jaw moved once. It means she is now the landlord. Yes. He stood up. He did not thank her. He turned toward the door. Mr. Zhang. He stopped. One more thing, she wanted me to tell you. Denise held his eyes. She is not the same woman who arrived in Seoul 4 years ago. That woman is gone. She did not survive what you did to her father. What you are dealing with now is what she built out of the wreckage. She wanted you to know that. She said it was important that you know that specifically. Zhang stood in the doorway a long moment. Then he inclined his head, 1 degree, the way a man acknowledges an opponent across a chessboard when the position has become unrecoverable. He walked out. At 35,000 feet over Utah, the Gulf Stream leveled off. Camille slipped the long cream coat off her shoulders finally and let a flight attendant take it. She asked for still water with lemon. Alexander was reading a memo on the Port of Oakland acquisition they would announce in 4 weeks. She watched him for a moment without his knowing. Then she opened her own laptop, and she opened the Century City file, and she began, calmly, without hurry, to sketch the outline of what came next. She wrote 3 lines. Dissolve Long Beach extortion arm within 90 days. Restitution to the estate of Marcus Harrington, no less than the audited 2021 valuation plus interest. Full and voluntary FBI cooperation on the remaining 14 counts. She looked at the 3 lines. She closed the laptop. She turned toward the window. Below her, the country unrolled in browns and reds and long white lines of empty highway. She thought about her father's office in Baltimore with the glass door. She thought about the accounting binders in the parking lot. She thought about her mother on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital room, holding a cup of coffee she was not drinking. She thought about 3 years of nude midi dresses. She thought about the ledger in the vault at 5 a.m. that morning and how her hands had not shaken once. She was not smiling. She was not crying. She was somewhere past both, in the country that opens up on the far side of an ending that you engineered yourself. Alexander glanced up from his memo. You are quiet. I am counting. Counting what? The number of women in my family who have watched a man take everything and walked away with nothing. I am the 7th generation on my mother's side. I am the first who has walked away with something instead. He set the memo down. That is a heavy sentence to say into a window. It is a light sentence, actually. It is only heavy if you are the woman before me. It is light if you are the one after me. He did not answer that. He nodded once and picked the memo back up. That was the right response. She had chosen him partly because he understood when a sentence was not asking to be improved. She opened the laptop again. She drafted an email to her mother. She did not send it. She would call instead, when they landed, from the car, from a phone that was clean. Her mother would ask if she was safe. She would say yes. Her mother would ask if she was happy. She would say she was learning what that word meant on the other side of a marriage that had been a job. Her mother would cry a little and pretend not to. Her mother would ask when she could come see her. Camille would say soon. Soon would mean this weekend. She closed the laptop again. At 9:52 a.m. Pacific Time, in a black glass tower in Century City, Zhang Siwu stepped out of the elevator into the lobby and stood for a full minute in the marble atrium without moving. Men who had followed him for 11 years did not know where he was. His phone had 31 missed calls. He looked at none of them. He walked out onto the sidewalk into the Los Angeles sun and stood there while his driver pulled the Maybach up to the curb, and he thought, with the same cold clarity he had brought to every port takeover of his career, about what a man does when he has been outbuilt. He got into the car. Where to, boss? Zhang looked out the window at the tower. 34th floor. Somewhere behind that glass, a woman he had married and underestimated for 3 years and 4 months had left instructions for him with an attorney 11 days ago. She had known he would come. She had known which building she had left the sentence about not being angry for last, because she had known he would need it last, because she had known him well enough to write the script of this exact morning from the inside of a marriage he had thought was quiet. Bel Air, he said. The house. Sir. And cancel the flowers for Volkov. The Maybach pulled into traffic. Zhang leaned his head against the leather and closed his eyes for the length of one long breath. When he opened them, the city looked the same. The city was not the same. Nothing was the same. Somewhere over Utah, his wife was drinking still water with lemon in a jet that did not belong to him, and she was writing the terms of a negotiation he had not yet been invited to, and she was doing it in a dress the color of champagne. The Gulf Stream banked slightly east. New York was 5 hours away. Camille watched Los Angeles shrink beneath the wing, a lattice of light dissolving into the desert dark. She kept her hands folded on her lap. The champagne gold silk pooled around her ankles like something molten that had cooled into armor. Somewhere below, Jiang Si-woo was still standing on that tarmac. She did not think about him, not yet. Alexander sat across from her, his tablet open, his gray eyes moving across a screen that reflected in twin miniatures on his glasses. He had not asked her a single soft question since takeoff. That was the courtesy she had bargained for. No pity, no congratulations, only the work. Manhattan legal team is meeting us at Teterboro, he said. His voice was low, almost bored. The Zurich correspondent will join by encrypted line at 0900 Eastern. Your father's assets can be reassembled inside 72 hours if you sign the trust reformation tonight. I will sign it on the ground, Camille said. Not before. Alexander looked up. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. Reasonable. She turned her face to the window. The Rockies were coming, a black spine under the moon. She let herself think, for one moment, of her father in the Century City conference room 14 years ago, his hand shaking as he signed a paper he did not understand. She let herself think of her mother in the hospice, whispering that she was proud, whispering that she had raised a woman who would not kneel. Then she closed the drawer inside her chest and locked it, and put the key back where she kept the others. Alexander. When we land, I want a rooftop. He set the tablet down. Which building? Yours. The one on Park, with the helipad and the glass room on the 60th floor. The room your father used for the Argentine negotiations in '98. His jaw worked once. You've done your reading. I did 3 years of reading. I would like to use some of it. Who is coming to this rooftop? Jiang Si-woo, she said. Alone. No security. No lawyers. No phone. He will call you tomorrow morning at 8 and ask for a meeting. You will give him the address. You will not be in the room. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. The cabin hummed. The stewardess passed with a tray she did not offer. You are certain, he said at last. I am certain. He has killed men for less than what you did tonight. He has killed men who could not do what I did tonight, Camille said. That is the difference. He will come alone because he understands he lost the game the second I stepped onto this plane. He will come alone because pride is the last currency he has, and he cannot spend it in front of witnesses. He will come alone because I am the only person in the world who knows exactly how much he has left to lose, and he needs to hear the number from me. Alexander looked at her for a long time. You are a frightening woman, Camille. I am a prepared woman, she said. There is a difference. He picked up his tablet again. The rooftop is yours. 8:15. I will have coffee sent up. Anything else? Yes, she smiled for the first time since Van Nuys. It was a small smile, private, meant only for the glass. Have someone dry clean the coat by morning. I want to wear it again. She did not sleep on the plane. She spent 2 hours with Alexander's counsel by encrypted video, walking through the trust reformation clause by clause. She spent another hour on a call with the bureau liaison who had been her back channel for 11 months, a woman named Reyes whose voice was flat and whose questions were exact. She spent 40 minutes reading the Times draft that would not run until Thursday, correcting 3 factual errors and 1 implied one. She spent the rest of the flight watching the moon slide across the wing. She landed at Teterboro at 4:11 a.m. Eastern. She was in the hotel by 5. She showered at the hotel, wrapped herself in a robe, and sat by the window watching the sun come up over the East River. Her phone, the new one, buzzed once at 6:42, a single message from an unknown Seoul number. Rooftop. Name the time. She typed back, 8:15. Alexander's building. Come alone or do not come. She did not receive a reply. She did not need one. At 7:30 she dressed. The champagne gold gown was gone, hung in a closet she would probably never open again. In its place, she wore a tailored suit in ivory wool, sharp shoulders, cigarette trousers, a silk shell the color of unripe wheat beneath the jacket. Her hair fell loose down her back. a river of black silk. She put on the diamond studs her mother had given her at 18. She put on lipstick the color of dried blood. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman she had been designing for 3 years. She was ready. The elevator to the 60th floor took 41 seconds. She counted them. The security officer at the front desk did not ask her name. He simply stood as she approached, pressed a black keycard into her palm, and stepped aside. Alexander had briefed his people well. She did not thank him. Thanks were for people who had not paid. The glass room was empty when she stepped in. The east wall was one enormous window, and Manhattan lay under it like a spread hand. 2 chairs, a low table, a silver pot of coffee, and 2 cups turned upside down. She turned 1 cup right side up and poured. She did not pour the second. She stood at the window and waited. At 8:14 the elevator chimed. Jiang Si-woo walked in. He was wearing the black shirt. Of course he was. The mangas rolled to the forearms, the 2 buttons open, the discreet dragon crawling up the left side of his neck like something waking. His hair was slicked back the way it had always been. His face was as still as she remembered, but there was something under the stillness now, something she had never seen before. A hairline crack. He did not speak. He walked to the second chair and stood behind it. He did not sit. Sit down, Si-woo. His eyes moved across her once. Not the way he used to look at her, cataloging her the way a jeweler catalogs a stone he owns. This was different. This was a man looking at a country he had lost the map to. He sat. She poured the second cup. She placed it in front of him. She sat across from him and crossed her legs and folded her hands on her knee. The city hummed 60 floors below. "You are quiet," she said. "I am listening." Good. She let the silence stretch. She had learned silence from him, 3 years of it, and now she gave it back to him with interest. His hand went to the coffee cup. It did not shake, quite, but it did not travel in the perfectly straight line she had watched it travel 1,000 times. "Long Beach is closed," he said finally. "I know. 17 containers. Federal seizure. 6 of my captains in a holding facility in San Pedro. 2 of the shell companies have been frozen by the Treasury. My cousin in Incheon has stopped answering his phone." "That would be the pattern," Camille said mildly. "Zurich. Zurich is more complicated. Zurich takes another 11 days to fully unwind. But your correspondent at Cantonal Bank received a subpoena at 4 this morning. He is currently on a plane to a country with no extradition treaty. He is not coming back." Jiang's jaw moved. He did not look away from her. "How long?" he said. "How long what?" "How long have you been building this?" 3 years, 1 month, and 9 days, Camille said. "I started the morning after the wedding, when you left the room to take a call, and I opened the wall safe with the combination you had written on the back of the family altar photograph. I copied the first 11 pages that morning. There were 389 more after that." He closed his eyes. Just once. Just for a beat. When he opened them, he said, "You wore the ring." "I wore the ring." "You said my name in Korean." "I did." "You knelt when my mother came into the room." "I did." All of it was theater. All of it, Camille said, was work. He drank the coffee. His throat moved. He set the cup down with exquisite care. "What do you want?" "I want 3 things. I will not repeat them. Do not negotiate. I did not come here to negotiate. I came here to dictate. Do you understand?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once. 1. You will dissolve the port extortion arm, in writing, signed under Korean law and under California law, and filed with counsel of my choosing. Every captain, every runner, every dock worker on your payroll gets a severance package and a non-disclosure. The infrastructure ceases to exist by the end of the fiscal quarter. If a single container moves under your name after October 1st, I release the second dossier. You have not seen the second dossier. You would not enjoy it. His hand tightened on his knee. He said nothing. 2. My father's estate. The bond portfolio your organization stripped in 2011. The Century City property your shell company bought out of receivership for 11 cents on the dollar. The Newport Beach house. The Napa Vineyard. All of it. Restored to the Harrington Family Trust. At current market valuation, not at the theft valuation. That is a 9-figure correction. I know what the number is. So do you. He inhaled slowly through his nose. 3. You will meet with a federal task force I have already introduced you to on paper. You will not go to prison. That has been arranged. But you will testify against the Choi organization in Busan, against your uncle's laundering operation in Vancouver, and against the 2 Los Angeles officials whose names I have already given the Bureau. You will cooperate fully. You will do it in Korean, and you will do it in English, and you will do it on camera. She uncrossed her legs. She recrossed them the other way. You have until Friday at noon to sign all 3. If you do not sign, I release the dossier to the Department of Justice, to the Korean National Police Agency, and to the 2 journalists at the Times and the Chosun Ilbo, who have been quietly waiting for it since April. You will lose the extortion arm anyway. You will lose the estate anyway. You will lose your freedom, and your mother will read her son's name in the morning paper next to the word indicted. The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had ever heard. Jang Si-woo did not move for a full minute. Then he lifted his eyes to her and she saw, for the first time in 3 years, the man behind the frost. He was tired. He was 37 years old, and he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Camille. Do not. I did not know you. No, she said gently. You did not. That was the point. I could have. You could have asked. You never did. He looked away, finally, at the window. Manhattan glittered under him like something he no longer owned. The night of the wedding, he said. You wore white. You would not look at me during the ceremony. I thought it was fear. It was arithmetic, Camille said. He almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when he understands he has been playing checkers on a chessboard for 3 years. I will sign. I know. All 3. I know. By Friday. By Wednesday, she said. Friday is for the second man in your position. You are the first. He nodded slowly. His hand went inside his jacket. He moved it slowly enough that she could see him moving it. He took out a black envelope and set it on the table between them. I brought this, he said. In case. What is it? The deed to the Bel Air house, the Napa property, papers for the Century City building. Not everything, but the beginning. I signed them last night. She looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. Why? He was silent for a long time. Because on the tarmac, he said, when you walked up those stairs, you did not look back. And I understood. Understood what? That I had married the only woman in the world who was smarter than me. And I had spent 3 years teaching her exactly how I ran everything. And I had never once asked her opinion. She let that sit between them. Then she said, take the envelope back. His eyes came up sharp. Take it back. I will not accept anything you were not compelled to give. That envelope was voluntary. Voluntary is not the same as owed. Give it to me through counsel, with the rest, on Wednesday. I want the paperwork clean. I want it to say restitution, not gift, never gift. He picked up the envelope. He slid it back inside his jacket. His hand was very steady now. Understood. Good. She stood. He stood. He was still 8 inches taller than her. She had forgotten that. She had never let herself notice, in 3 years, how much taller he was. She noticed it now, and it did not matter at all. There is one more thing, she said. He waited. The Russian girl, Vasilenko's daughter, Katya. His face did not change. Cancel the arrangement, Camille said. Not because of me. Because of her. She is 19. She does not know what she is walking into. Send her home. Pay her father whatever face-saving fee he needs. But send her home. He looked at her for a long moment. Why do you care? Because someone should have canceled mine, Camille said. And no one did, and I made it out. But I am not owed the assumption that she will. Something moved in his eyes, something old, something almost human. I will send her home. Thank you. She walked past him toward the elevator. At the door she paused. She did not turn around. Si-woo. Yes. You were not a bad husband, she said. You were a stranger who thought he was a husband. Those are different things. I hope someday you learn the difference. I will not be there to teach it to you. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed on his reflection in the glass, on the black shirt, on the dragon at his throat, on a man who had understood, at last, that the woman he thought he had bought had been buying him back for 3 years, 1 page at a time. The elevator descended. She did not cry. She had cried in year 1, quietly, in the shower, with the water on hot. She had stopped in year 2. She was not going to start again now. Tuesday she spent in depositions. 6 hours with the bureau, 3 with the Korean liaison who had flown in from the consulate, 2 with the forensic accountants who had been building the parallel case since spring. She answered every question in complete sentences. She did not embellish. She did not soften. When the lead prosecutor asked her, at the end, if she had any personal feelings about Mr. Jong that might complicate her testimony, she looked at him and said, "None that will interfere with the record." He nodded once and closed his notebook. She slept 11 hours that night. It was the first time she had slept 11 hours since her mother's funeral. Wednesday came. She sat in the Century City conference room she had chosen for its symbolism, 3 floors above the bank vault where her dossier had lived for 2 years, 7 floors above the office her father had lost in 2011. Her lawyers sat to her right, 4 of them, in identical charcoal suits. Alexander sat to her left, present as an observer only, his fingers laced on the table. At 11:58 the door opened. Jang Si-woo walked in. He was alone. He was wearing the black shirt. He carried a leather portfolio in his left hand and nothing in his right. He crossed the room and sat in the single chair on the opposite side of the table. He set the portfolio down. He slid it across. "Everything," he said. "Signed, notarized in Seoul on Monday. Countersigned in Los Angeles this morning. The task force papers are on top. The dissolution order is beneath. The restitution schedule is beneath that. Zurich transferred to the Harrington Trust at 6 a.m. Pacific. The confirmation number is on page 11. Camille's lead counsel opened the portfolio. He began to read. He did not look up for 11 minutes. Jong did not move. He looked at Camille. Camille looked at the window. At last her counsel closed the portfolio. He nodded once at her. "Everything is in order," he said. "Fully executed. Every condition met." "Thank you, Marcus." "There is a final page," her counsel added, "attached separately. Mr. Jang, would you like to introduce it, or shall I?" Jang cleared his throat, very softly. "I would like a seat," he said. "On the board of the reformed shipping entity, minority, non-voting, advisory only, under her rules, under her counsel, under her chairmanship, reviewable annually, terminable at her sole discretion, without cause, without severance." The room was very quiet. Camille turned her face from the window. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I know the ports," he said. "I know every operator on the West Coast. I know who is honest and who is not. I know which unions will cooperate and which will not. I know it better than any consultant you could hire, and I would like to be useful, to something clean, for once." She studied him for a long time. "You would take orders from me?" "Yes." "In front of a board that would know exactly who you were?" "Yes." "For no equity, no voting share, no compensation beyond a consulting fee I would set?" "Yes." "You would sit in a room where I could have you removed with a single motion, and you would speak only when I gave you permission to speak?" "Yes." "Why?" she said again, softer this time. He looked down at his hands. Then he looked up. "Because I spent 3 years across a dinner table from a woman I did not see," he said. "And now that I have seen her, I would like to stay in the room, even if the chair is small, even if the chair is uncomfortable, even if the chair is not, in fact, a chair." She let that sit. Then she said, "I accept the professional collaboration, under those exact terms." Something eased in his shoulders, something so small, only she would have seen it. 3 years of dinners had taught her to see it. "But Si-woo." "Yes, that is all I accept. There is nothing else on the table. There will never be anything else on the table. Do you understand me?" He held her eyes. He nodded. "I understand." "Say it." "There is nothing else on the table. There will never be anything else on the table." "Thank you." She stood. He stood. Her lawyers stood. Alexander stood last, unhurried, the mildly amused mountain in the corner of the room. Jang extended his hand across the table. Camille looked at it. She reached across, she took it. She shook it once, firmly, professionally, the way a chairman shakes the hand of a minority advisor at the end of a productive meeting. She let go first. "Mr. Kim will walk you out," she said. "He has the paperwork for your consulting appointment. First board meeting is the 15th. Please be on time." "I will." He nodded to Alexander. Alexander nodded back. Jang turned. He walked to the door. His hand went to the handle. He paused. He did not turn around. Camille. Yes. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, he said. I am sorry I only understood it on the runway. She was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry too, Saiwu. For what? For a while, she said. I thought I would need you to lose in order to feel that I had won. I was wrong about that. I did not need you to lose. I only needed to stop needing you at all. I stopped needing you somewhere over Colorado. Everything after that has been paperwork. He inhaled. He held it. He released it. Then he opened the door and walked out. The door closed softly behind him. Alexander waited until the elevator chime had faded before he spoke. Chairman Harrington, he said. Mr. Whitmore. Lunch. Lunch. They walked out together into the corridor. The afternoon sun came sideways through the glass. Camille caught her reflection in the polished window as she passed. The ivory suit, the diamond studs, the hair falling straight and gleaming down her back, the small, precise smile that belonged to no man in the world and never would again. She thought, briefly, of the 28-year-old woman who had knelt on a lacquered floor in Seoul and murmured the word husband in a language that was not hers. She thought of that woman as one thinks of a younger sister who had gone off to war and come back changed and unbroken and taller than she had left. Then she stopped thinking of her. The elevator opened. They stepped in. Alexander pressed the ground floor. Her phone buzzed once against her palm. She glanced at the screen. A single line from an unknown Seoul relay. Katya landed in Sheremetyevo. Her father was paid. No reprisal. It is done. She read it twice, then she deleted it, then she deleted the thread, then she deleted the number. Alexander watched her without watching her. Good news, he said, not a question. Housekeeping, she answered. The last of it. He nodded, satisfied with the amount of information he had been given, which was exactly the right amount. Where would you like to eat? He asked. Somewhere with a view, she said. I have grown fond of views. The doors closed. 60 floors below, Century City rolled out beneath them, and somewhere far to the west, the Pacific was the color of hammered silver, and somewhere far to the east, the future was already being drafted in her name, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a woman in an ivory suit stood in an elevator, descending toward a lunch she had earned, and she was, for the first time in a decade, entirely and only herself. She had not begged. She had built. And what she had built was already, quietly, taller than the man who had once believed he owned her. The elevator hummed. The floors ticked down. Camille Harrington closed her eyes for one beat, one single unguarded beat, and allowed herself the smallest breath of something she had not permitted for 3 years, 1 month, and 9 days. It was not triumph. It was rest, at long last, the kind of rest that only belongs to a woman who has finished carrying something she never agreed to pick up in the first place. Back in Los Angeles, the tarmac at Van Nuys had emptied. The Gulf Stream was gone. The last echo of its engines had drained out of the desert air and left behind only the flat, metallic hum of the runway lights and the far-off sigh of the 405. Jang Si-woo stood exactly where Camille had left him. He had not moved for 11 minutes. His driver counted them on the dashboard clock and did not dare open the car door. The phone in his hand had stopped ringing. That was the part that frightened him most. When men like Jang Si-woo stopped receiving calls, it was not silence, it was verdict. He looked down at the black glass. 47 missed notifications. 6 of them from the harbor captain in Long Beach, 3 from his lieutenant in Koreatown, 2 from a number in Seoul that he had not seen light up in 9 years, a number that belonged to his uncle, the one who had told him at 17 that a man who cannot control his wife cannot control a port. He slid the phone into his inside pocket and walked to the car. The Bentley smelled of leather and cold cologne. He sat down in the back. He did not close the door. His driver waited. The night did not move. Home, Jang said, finally. Bel Air, sir? Bel Air. The car pulled away. The runway lights slid past the window like teeth. On the drive up Sepulveda, the calls began again. Not the harbor captain now. The captain had already been taken. It was the lawyer, then the accountant, Then a private number he recognized as the Korean Consul General's private line, the one used only for what the consul called situations of national embarrassment. Jang let each one ring twice and then decline. His face, in the tinted reflection of the passenger window, did not change. His mouth was a line, his eyes were still, but his hand, resting flat against his thigh, had begun to press into the fabric of the trouser, as if he were trying to steady the floor of a boat. By the time the Bentley climbed the last curve of Stone Canyon Road and slid through the gates of the Bel-Air estate, 4 containers had been opened by federal agents in the port of Long Beach. Manifests that had lived for 11 years in the crawl space between shell companies had been photographed under fluorescent light. 6 shipping executives had been walked out of their offices in handcuffs before the 11 o'clock news. A senior Port Authority officer, a man Jang had put in place 7 years earlier and paid quarterly through a shell in Vanuatu, had been detained at Los Angeles International Airport trying to board a flight to Manila. None of this was on the news yet. All of it was on the phones of every man who mattered. The gate closed behind the Bentley. The house was dark. Camille had not turned on the exterior lights before she left, and the staff, per her final instruction that afternoon, had been dismissed early with 2 weeks of severance. Jang stepped out of the car onto the pale gravel of the front court. His Italian leather made no sound. The fountain that his interior designer had insisted upon 9 years ago was still running, a soft, continuous sob against the silence of the canyon. He climbed the 6 shallow steps to the front door. He put his hand against the brass. He did not turn the key. He simply stood there, feeling the metal cool under his palm, and listened to the sound of a house that no longer contained the woman it had been built to hold. Then he pushed the door open. The foyer was immaculate, every surface polished, every flower still fresh in its vase. On the console table in the center of the entry, under the light of the single lamp Camille had left burning, a small stack of folders had been arranged with a stationer's precision. On top of the stack was a single ivory envelope with his name written on it in her careful hand. He did not touch the envelope. He walked past it. He crossed the marble to the great room, and he did not turn on the lights. He stood at the window that looked south across the pool and the canyon and the far orange grid of the city, and he watched the plane he could no longer see continue its arc toward Manhattan. He stood there for a long time. His phone rang again. He looked at it. The screen said Seoul, no name. He answered. He listened for 9 seconds. He hung up. He set the phone on the marble sill of the window, and he pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and for the first time in his adult life, Jang Si-woo made a sound he did not authorize. It was not a word, it was not a sob. It was the small, involuntary exhale of a man who understood, at a level below language, that the shape of his life had been rearranged while he was watching the wrong hand. He straightened. He returned to the foyer. He picked up the envelope. He carried it to his study. The study was the one room in the house that had always been his, and only his. Dark walnut, green banker's lamp, a wall of books he had never read, and a wall of photographs he had never framed. He sat in his chair. He turned on the lamp. He opened the envelope with the silver letter opener his mother had given him at his college graduation. There was 1 page inside. The paper was cream. The handwriting was hers. He read it twice. Si-woo, you may keep the house. You may keep the cars. You may keep the paintings. You may keep every material thing in your name and every material thing in mine, and I will not contest a single dollar of it in the divorce you announced tonight. I have taken from this marriage only what was always mine, which is my father's name, my father's money, and my own future. The rest is yours. I hope it is worth the price you will pay for it beginning tomorrow morning, Camille. He read it a 3rd time. Then he set the page on the desk. He aligned its edges with the edge of the wood. He turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark of his own study for the length of time it takes a good man to make a bad decision and a bad man to remember he was once good. He did not move. He did not reach for the phone. He did not open the safe behind the Rothko and take out the small, unregistered pistol he had kept there for 11 years. He did not weep. He simply sat, in the dark, with the smell of his own cologne going sour on his skin, and he counted, in the private accounting of a man who had built an empire on other men's fear, the exact scale of what he had lost. At 2 in the morning, he stood up. He walked to the wet bar. He poured a glass of a whiskey he had been saving for the night his first son would be born. He drank it in one motion. He set the glass down carefully so it would not break. Then he went upstairs. He went to her closet. He opened it, and he stood in the doorway and looked at what she had left behind. The empty side of the closet was not empty. She had left every single dress he had ever bought her. The nude silks, the off-white crepes, the pearl gray midi she had worn to the Getty. She had hung them by color. She had left the tags of the newest ones still attached, so he could return them if he wished. She had left the drawer of jewelry open, and every piece he had given her in 3 years of marriage was arranged on the velvet in the order he had presented them, from the first pair of pearl earrings at their engagement dinner to the emerald cuff she had worn on their second anniversary. She had taken nothing of his. She had taken only what she came with. John closed the closet door. He walked back down the hall to his own bedroom. He undressed with the precision of a man performing his own last rite. He hung the black shirt. He hung the black trousers. He set the shoes side by side under the bench. He removed the silver watch and the black signet ring, and he set them on the dresser next to a small photograph of his mother that he had not looked at in 6 years. He lay down on top of the covers, in his undershirt, and he stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep. At sunrise, the calls began in earnest. The first was his consigliere, a 62-year-old accountant named Byung-ho, who had been with Jang's family since the Seoul years. Byung-ho's voice on the line was tight, controlled, and terrified. "Boss, the port is closed. Federal warrants on 9 containers. They are opening a 10th as we speak. The Kim brothers have been arrested at their homes. Captain Park is cooperating. He was picked up at his sister's house in Cerritos at 4 this morning. Where is my lawyer?" "Which one, boss?" Jang did not answer for a moment. His silence was the silence of a man realizing he had 13 lawyers and did not know which one to call, because he did not know yet which fire he was fighting. "All of them. Bring all of them to the house." "Boss, 2 of them have already resigned. Their firms called at 5. They say the exposure is too broad." "Which 2? Byung-ho named them. They were the 2 who handled the port work. They were the 2 who knew where the shell companies were buried. Jang understood, in that moment, that his lawyers had received the same phone call his harbor captain had received, and they had made the calculation faster than he had made his. "Get the rest here by 10, he said. "Boss," Byung-ho hesitated. "The Seoul family called me at 3 this morning. Your uncle has requested that you not travel back to Korea for the next 90 days. He said it is for your protection." Jang closed his eyes. He knew what that meant. His uncle was not protecting him. His uncle was quarantining him. "Tell my uncle I understand." "Boss." He hung up. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had signed the death warrants of 6 competitors in 11 years and had never trembled while doing it. They were shaking now. Not from fear, he told himself. From the whiskey, from the lack of sleep. He did not believe himself. He stood up. He walked to the shower. He turned the water as hot as it would go, and he stood under it for a long time, and when he stepped out, he did not look at his own face in the mirror. By 9 in the morning, 3 federal vehicles were parked on Stone Canyon Road, just outside the gate of his estate. They did not enter. They did not need to. They were simply establishing presence, establishing that the walls of Bel Air did not exclude the reach of the Southern District of California. By 10, his remaining lawyers arrived. There were 4 of them. He led them to the study. He served them coffee himself, because there was no staff. He listened to them explain, in the careful, hedged language of men billing $1,700 an hour, that the exposure was worse than they had thought overnight, that the manifests being processed at the Long Beach Federal Building were not just from the past 3 years, they were from the past 11, that someone, they did not know who, had provided the government with a document trail that was, in the words of the senior partner, surgically comprehensive. Jang listened. He did not interrupt. When they were done, he asked one question. "Do we know who?" The senior partner set his coffee down. He looked at his younger colleague. Then he looked back at Jang. "The provenance of the material is protected, but the sophistication of it, boss, the internal cross-referencing of the shell entities against the Panamanian filings, the timeline reconstruction that matches your acquisition sequence in Long Beach. Whoever assembled it had access to your books for at least 3 years. Whoever assembled it lived inside your life." The room was very quiet. Jiang did not move his face. "Thank you," he said. "Please continue. I would like to know by end of business today what my personal criminal exposure is under the RICO statute." The lawyers left. The estate emptied again. Jiang went back to the study, alone, and he sat in his chair, and he permitted himself, for exactly 90 seconds, to close his eyes and see her. He saw her in the garden of the Getty, 4 months ago, in the pearl gray midi, her hand on the rim of a champagne flute she had barely touched. He saw her in the kitchen of the Bel Air house every morning at 6, drinking green tea in silence, reading a novel he had never asked about. He saw her at their wedding in Seoul 3 years ago, her mouth composed into the exact smile the photographer had asked for, and he understood, with a clarity that felt almost surgical, that she had been dossier building him since the day she had walked down the aisle, perhaps earlier. Perhaps she had begun the day his men had broken the windows of her father's office and taken the servers. He had married her thinking she was a bargain. He had lived with a strategist. He opened his eyes. He picked up his phone. He scrolled to her name. His thumb hovered over the call button for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he did not press it. He put the phone back down. He was not stupid. He knew that any call he made to her now would be admitted into evidence in the trial he was about to face. He also knew, in a colder register beneath the strategy, that she would not answer. He stood up. He walked out of the study. He walked through the great room and past the pool and out onto the lawn that dropped toward the canyon, and he stood there in his shirt sleeves in the noon heat of a Los Angeles that was already starting to feel like a foreign country, and he watched a red-tailed hawk turn slow circles over the ridge. His phone rang. It was a number he did not know. He answered anyway. "Mr. Jiang," a woman's voice, American, middle-aged, professional. "This is Special Agent Dela Cruz with the FBI Los Angeles Field Office. We would like to schedule an interview at your convenience. My colleagues and I will be available every day this week. We would prefer sooner rather than later." He did not speak for a moment. His mouth had gone dry. "Am I under arrest, Agent Dela Cruz?" "Not at this time. We are extending a courtesy. It is our understanding that you may wish to be cooperative given the material we now have in our possession." He almost laughed. It was a small, dry sound in the back of his throat that never quite made it into the phone. "I will have my counsel contact you today." "Very well. Have a pleasant afternoon, Mr. Jiang." She hung up first. He stood on the lawn a while longer. The hawk kept turning. The city below him was continuing its ordinary Tuesday. His phone kept vibrating. He did not look at it. He thought, for the first time in 11 years, about the first apartment he had rented in Los Angeles, a 2-bedroom above a Korean bakery in Koreatown that had smelled of yeast at 4 every morning. He had been 26. He had believed that if he worked hard and killed only when he had to, and never once permitted himself the luxury of love, he would build something no one could take from him. He had been wrong about only one of those. He walked back inside the house. He climbed the stairs to the bedroom that had been theirs. He sat on the edge of the bed, on her side, and he opened the drawer of the nightstand where she had kept her books. The drawer was empty. There was only a single folded note tucked into the back seam. He took it out. He unfolded it. It was not addressed to him. It was a photocopy of a page from a legal pad, in her handwriting, dated 3 years and 1 month earlier, 4 days before their wedding in Seoul. It said, in her careful, tilted script, 3 years, long enough to map him, short enough to keep breathing. She had left it for him to find, not accidentally, deliberately. She had wanted him to know, in the specific hour that he sat on the edge of what had been their bed, that she had walked into the marriage with the exit already drawn, that every silence at breakfast had been a survey, that every submission in bed had been a measurement, that she had never, not once, not for a single hour in 3 years, been the woman he thought he had bought. He folded the note. He put it in his breast pocket. He sat there. He did not move for a long time. Somewhere in Manhattan, 4,000 kilometers east, a Gulf Stream was descending toward Teterboro through the pearl-blue haze of a summer morning, and a woman in champagne gold silk was reading through a trust reformation document while a lawyer poured her a second cup of coffee. She did not know, in that moment, that Jiang Si-woo was sitting on the edge of a bed in Bel Air with a photocopy of her handwriting against his heart. She did not need to know. She had planned for exactly this outcome, and she had planned for it with the patience of a woman who had understood, 3 years and 1 month earlier, that survival was a discipline and freedom was a project. Back in Bel Air, Jang stood. He walked downstairs. He went to the wet bar. He did not pour a drink this time. He simply stood there, with his hands flat on the marble, and he lowered his head, and for the second time in 12 hours he made an involuntary sound. Smaller than the first, drier, the kind of sound a man makes when he understands that the ledger of his life has been closed and rewritten by a hand he never learned to read. He straightened. He fixed his shirt. He tucked the note deeper into his breast pocket. Then he went to work. Because he was still Jiang Si-woo, and whatever else he had lost in the last 20 hours, he had not yet lost the discipline that had built him. If she had spent 3 years building a case against him, he would spend the next 30 days deciding what remained of him worth defending. Before he called Byung-ho, he did one more thing. He walked back through the great room, past the console table in the foyer, and he stopped at the stack of folders Camille had left. He had walked past them the night before because he had not been able to bear the sight of her handwriting on the envelope. Now he could. He picked up the folders. He carried them into the study. He set them on the desk beside the leather ledger. He opened the first. Inside was a copy of every property title held in his name in Los Angeles County. Each title had been annotated in her handwriting in the margins with a small notation, in blue ink, of the specific shell company that had funneled the acquisition money, the exact month the funds had moved, and the correspondent bank in either Panama or Vanuatu that had cleared the transfer. The annotations were surgical. They were precisely the level of documentation the Southern District would need to establish, in court, that his real estate portfolio in California was proceeds of racketeering. He set the folder down. He opened the second. Inside was a copy of every offshore trust document she had ever seen him sign in 3 years of marriage, arranged chronologically, with photocopies of the passports of the nominee trustees clipped to each cover page. The trustees were men he had believed were untraceable. She had traced them. He opened the third. It was thinner. It contained a single sheet. The sheet was a list of 14 names. Each name was the legal owner of record of one of the shell companies she had spent 3 years mapping. Beside each name, in her hand, was written the person's actual address in Seoul, Manila, or Vancouver. Beside each address was written a single date. He recognized the dates. They were the dates on which each shell company had been dissolved by court order in the country of its registration. He read the list twice. The dissolutions had all been filed in the previous 90 days. She had not only assembled the case, she had already begun to unwind the machinery. By the time the federal warrants had opened the containers at Long Beach that morning, half of his shell architecture had already been legally erased in the jurisdictions where it lived, so that when investigators traced the money back through the maze itself was collapsing behind them. He closed the folder. He put both hands flat on the desk, and he lowered his head between his shoulders, and he breathed once, very slowly, through his nose. Then he sat up. He picked up the phone. He dialed Byung-ho. He told him to convene the last loyal captains at the safe house in Torrance at 8 that evening. He told him to bring the Zurich banker on encrypted line. He told him to prepare a personal inventory of every asset that could be moved, and every asset that could not. He hung up. He walked to the study. He opened the safe behind the Rothko, and he took out, not the pistol, but a leather folder that contained the private ledger of everything he had ever earned, outside the reach of any government. He set the folder on the desk. He sat down. He began to read. Outside, the noon sun burned down on the pale gravel of the front court, and the fountain kept running its soft, continuous sob, and the empty house behind him seemed to lean forward slightly, as if listening, as if waiting to see what a man does in the hour after the woman he underestimated has finished with him. Jang read. He did not lift his head. He did not stop for water. He did not check the phone that continued, all afternoon, to vibrate against the wood of the desk, with the names of men who no longer trusted him, and lawyers who could no longer save him, and journalists who had already begun to write his obituary as a public figure. He read until the light changed. Then he closed the folder. He stood up. He walked to the window. He watched the sun begin its slow descent over the Pacific, and he understood, for the first time in his life, what it meant to be the one who was left behind on a runway while the plane climbed into a sky that no longer belonged to him. It was not rage. It was not grief. It was the particular, private silence of a man who has been outmaneuvered by the person he was most sure he had already broken. He turned from the window. He said her name once, aloud, in the empty room. He did not say it again. Then he went to prepare for the meeting at 8, because he was still a chess player, even if the queen had already left the board, and the only game left to play was the one that determined how much of the king remained standing when the last piece fell. The house watched him go. The fountain kept running. The gate at the end of the drive stayed closed against the world. And 4,000 kilometers east, in a glass room on the 60th floor of a building on Park Avenue, a woman was already sitting down at a long walnut table with 3 lawyers and an accountant, opening the first folder of the reconstruction of her father's estate. Her champagne gold silk exchanged for a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, her hands steady, her face composed, and her mouth quiet with the small, unshowy focus of a woman who had, at long last, come home to her own work. The walnut table was so long that the 3 lawyers and the accountant looked small at its far end, and Camille Harrington preferred it that way. Distance was a tool. Distance let her read a room the way Jiang Si-woo had once read a container manifest, slowly, line by line, without ever betraying which line mattered. The morning after her arrival in Manhattan, she had walked into this glass room on the 60th floor of a building on Park Avenue and told the receptionist that the client from Los Angeles was here. The receptionist had looked at her charcoal suit, her flat, disciplined hair, and the calm architecture of her face, and had understood, without being told, not to make her wait. Now, 4 days later, the first folder was already closed. The second was open, the third and fourth were stacked at her elbow, and a fifth had been couriered in that morning by a firm in Century City that had spent 36 months guarding a safe she had built with her own patience. The lawyers spoke when spoken to. The accountant kept his pen moving. Camille turned a page and did not look up. The Cayman entity dissolves this week, she said. The Nevada shell follows on the 15th. The Delaware holding company gets restructured under the family trust by month end. Am I missing anything, Mr. Bell? The senior lawyer, a man who had negotiated with cartels and pharmaceutical boards without blinking, tilted his head a quarter inch. Only that most clients would have taken a full year to do what you are asking us to do in 3 weeks. Most clients did not spend 3 years watching someone else do it wrong, Camille said. She turned another page. Continue. Alexander Whitmore was not in the room. That was deliberate. She had asked him to stay out of the reconstruction of her father's estate, and he had, with the unhurried grace of a man who understood that a partner who needed to be watched was not a partner at all. He was on a different floor, in a different meeting, closing on a shipping consortium whose logistics arm had, until 9 days ago, belonged to a Korean holding company that no longer existed. She would see him at 7. Until then, this was her work, hers alone. The intercom on the credenza chimed, the receptionist's voice, careful. Miss Harrington, there is a gentleman downstairs asking to see you. He does not have an appointment. He says his name is Jang. The lawyers did not move. The accountant lifted his pen half an inch and set it down. Camille closed the folder in front of her without hurry, aligned its edge with the edge of the table, and rested her hand on top of it. Tell him, she said, that Miss Harrington does not take unscheduled meetings in her offices. Tell him that if he wishes to speak with her, he may propose a location and a time, and her assistant will consider it. The intercom clicked off. The senior lawyer allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Camille did not return it. She reopened the folder. 20 minutes later, the intercom chimed again. Miss Harrington, he proposes the rooftop of the Ashford at 8 o'clock this evening. He says he will come alone. No security, no counsel. He says you may bring whomever you like. Camille considered the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at the senior lawyer. Mr. Bell, draft me a 1-page memorandum of understanding. 3 clauses. First, the complete dissolution of the port and container extortion arm operating out of Long Beach, San Pedro, and Oakland, verifiable by third-party audit within 90 days. Second, restitution in full of the assets stripped from Harrington Maritime Consulting between the years my father was alive and the year the last shell was formed, calculated with compound interest at the federal rate, deposited into an escrow of my choosing. Third, voluntary and documented cooperation with the ongoing federal investigation into Korean-American port racketeering, including sworn testimony and the surrender of encrypted ledgers currently held in Seoul. She paused. The pen at the far end of the table was moving very fast. "No signature line," she said. "This is not a contract. This is a menu. I want him to read it and understand that these are the only 3 items available tonight." "Miss Harrington," Mr. Bell said carefully, "you understand that men like this do not usually sit down for a menu." "He will sit," Camille said. She turned a page. "He has been sitting since the moment his phone stopped ringing on that tarmac. He simply hasn't realized yet that the chair is mine." She told her assistant to send a car for 7:30. She told the receptionist to inform the gentleman downstairs that 8 o'clock was acceptable. Then she went back to work, and the walnut table absorbed her again, and the folders opened and closed under her hand like doors she had built herself, with her own hinges, on her own frame. At 6, she went upstairs to the apartment Whitmore kept for her use and drew a bath. She soaked for 11 minutes, precisely, because 11 minutes was the length of time it took to lower a resting heart rate by 7 beats without inducing drowsiness. She had learned that in a house in Bel-Air. She had learned many useful things there. Then she stood and dried herself and walked, unhurried, to the dressing room. She did not choose the champagne gold. That dress had done its work. That dress belonged to a tarmac at Van Nuys and to a Gulf Stream lifting off into a bruised California sky, and she did not need to wear it again in order to remember what it had meant. Tonight, she chose something colder. She chose a floor-length column of black silk that hung from her shoulders in 2 clean vertical lines. No ornament, no plunge, no shimmer. A high, straight neckline, long, narrow sleeves, a back that rose almost to the base of her neck. The dress said nothing. The dress refused to perform. Over it she draped the same long cream coat she had worn onto the plane, because a small continuity mattered, because he needed to see that the woman who had walked away from him 9 days ago was the same woman walking toward him now. Sandals, low-heeled, silent, hair in a single low knot at the nape of her neck, one thin gold chain at her wrist, nothing at her ears, nothing at her throat. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who was no longer dressing for a man. She saw a woman dressing for a signature. The car took her uptown through a wet, luminous rain, and the driver, who was one of Whitmore's, did not attempt conversation. At the Ashford, she did not use the front entrance. She used the service elevator, because arriving where a man does not expect you to arrive is worth 10 minutes of leverage. At 2 minutes past 8, she stepped out onto the rooftop, and the wind pulled at her coat, and the city fell away around her in wet gold and black. Jiang Si-woo was already there. He was standing at the parapet with his back to her, his hands in the pockets of a long black wool overcoat, his slicked back hair damp at the temples from the rain that had stopped 10 minutes before. The dragon at the side of his neck was just visible above the coat's collar, the fine black scales darkened by the wet. He did not turn when the doors opened. He waited, the way she had once been made to wait in a courtyard in Seoul, the way she had once been made to wait at breakfast tables in Bel-Air. He waited because waiting had, for 37 years, been the thing that other people did while he decided. Camille walked to the small round table set out under a heated lamp and sat down. She placed the single folded page of Mr. Bell's memorandum on the table, aligned its edge with the edge of the marble, and folded her hands on top of it. "Sit down, Jiang," she said quietly. "The rain is coming back." He turned then. He looked at her for a long moment across 10 meters of wet rooftop, and she saw, in the fractional narrowing of his eyes, that he had been prepared for many versions of her tonight, and that this one, the composed, uninterested one, was not among them. He walked to the table. He unbuttoned his coat but did not remove it. He sat down opposite her, and he set his phone, face down, on the marble. "You did not tell me you were in New York," he said. His voice was the same voice, low, cool, beautifully modulated, slightly softer around the vowels than a native English speaker would render them, and slightly harder around the consonants. She had missed nothing about it, and that surprised her, because for 3 years she had thought she would miss the voice at least. "I did not tell you many things," Camille said. "I have come alone," he said. "I noticed. I have not brought counsel. I noticed that too." He glanced at the folded page under her hands. "May I?" "In a moment," she said. "First, I want to hear you speak. You have been rehearsing on a plane for 6 hours. I would like to know what you rehearsed." The muscle in his jaw moved once. He did not look away. "I underestimated you," he said at last. "That is not a sentence I need to hear. Continue." "I underestimated you," he said again, more slowly. as though the words themselves required a second attempt to fit inside his mouth. For 3 years, I lived with a woman I never once looked at properly. I saw a wife I had purchased. I did not see the woman inside the wife. I did not see that the woman inside the wife had already opened every drawer in my office by the end of the first year. I did not see that she was reading manifests over my shoulder while I thought she was reading fashion magazines. I did not see that she was memorizing account numbers while I thought she was choosing tableware. I did not see her because I did not believe she was worth the trouble of seeing. That was my error. That was the entire error. Everything downstream of that has been the consequence of that single, arrogant blindness. The rain returned in a fine, silvery mist. Camille did not look up at it. She did not blink. "Go on," she said. "3 days after you left," Zhang said, "the federal marshals sealed my main warehouse in San Pedro. The following morning, the Long Beach terminal was raided. 22 containers seized. 4 of my captains taken into custody. My banker in Zurich called me at 3 in the morning to inform me that 6 of my accounts had been frozen pending a treasury investigation whose paperwork he had never seen before. My name is on a subpoena list in Washington that did not exist 10 days ago. My father-in-law in Vladivostok has, through intermediaries, informed me that his daughter will not be arriving in Seoul next month, and that any further contact from my office will be considered impolite. My holding company in the Caymans dissolves on Thursday. There will be, by the end of this month, no legal entity in the world that bears my family name outside of a single passport, which I still carry, and which I am told is under review." He paused. The mist thickened. "I am here," he said, "because there is no one else left to negotiate with. Whitmore will not take my call. My uncle in Seoul will not take my call. My mother, God forgive her, will not take my call. You are the last door. You are the only door. I have come to it, alone, in the rain, because I understand, at last, that this is the door I was standing in front of the entire time." Camille let a silence sit between them. She let it lengthen until he began, very slightly, to feel it as pressure at the base of his throat. Then she slid the folded page across the marble. "Read this," she said. "Do not speak while you read it. Do not react while you read it. When you have finished, place it back where it was, and I will tell you the terms under which I will consider your presence in my life again." He read it. He read it once. He read it a second time. Then he folded it again, along the same crease, and placed it precisely where she had said it. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. She watched the pulse in the side of his neck, at the base of the dragon, and it was slightly faster than it had been 3 minutes ago, and that was the only tell. "These are your 3 items," he said. "These are my 3 items. There is no fourth. There is no fourth. You are asking me," Zhang said very quietly, "to dismantle the arm of my house that has produced 90% of its liquid revenue for 18 years. You are asking me to open my father's ledgers, which have never been read by anyone outside our blood, to a room full of American prosecutors. You are asking me to pay back, with interest, money that has already been moved through 4 generations of laundering, in a currency I do not fully control. You are asking me, in effect, to end the version of myself that walked into that courtyard in Seoul 3 years ago and married you." "Yes," Camille said, "that is exactly what I am asking." He looked at her for a long time. "And in exchange," he said, "what do I receive?" "You receive," Camille said, "the following. First, you are not arrested tonight. That is a specific gift, and it is expiring. Second, you are permitted to retain your passport, one residence of your choosing, outside the United States, and enough of your legitimate holdings to live a private life. Third, your name is not made public in connection with the trafficking side of the investigation. You cooperate quietly. You disappear quietly. You continue, in some diminished form, to exist. That is what you receive. And you," he said. "I do not receive anything from you," she said. "I do not need to. Everything I required has already arrived. My father's estate is being rebuilt in a room 3 blocks from here. My name is on a partnership agreement that closes on Friday. My work begins on Monday. You are, at this table, no longer a variable in my calculation. You are a signature I would prefer to obtain cleanly. That is the entire nature of your usefulness to me now." He absorbed that. The rain fell harder. Neither of them moved. "You want nothing," he said. "I want the 3 clauses. You want nothing from me personally. I want the 3 clauses, Jang. There was a night in Billionaire, he said, and his voice, for the first time in 3 years, roughened at the edges, when you sat on the terrace with a glass of water and did not speak to me for 2 hours. I thought at the time you were sulking. I understood, 4 days ago, that you were counting. That you had been counting the entire time. Every meal, every drive, every trip I took to the port, every phone call I ended in your presence. You were counting the intervals. You were mapping the routine. You were building a clock inside our marriage that I did not know was there. Yes, Camille said. Did you ever? He began, and then he stopped himself. He shook his head. Once. A small and disciplined refusal. No, I will not ask that. I do not deserve the answer, and the answer is not part of the 3 clauses. It is not, Camille said gently. But since you have almost asked, I will give you this much, and then we will return to the page. There was no year in that house in which I did not know exactly what you were. There was no month in which I forgot. There was no morning on which I woke beside you and did not remember, before I opened my eyes, what your men had done to a small office on the 12th floor of a building in Long Beach on a Tuesday in October, 3 months before my father died. Every kindness you showed me in that house was received and catalogued and filed. I did not confuse any of it with affection, not once, not for a single hour. So there is no wound in me for you to reach toward, Jang. There is only a ledger, and the ledger, as of tonight, closes. He was silent for a long moment. I will sign, he said. I have not yet asked you to sign anything. I understand that. I am telling you my answer in advance so that when the papers arrive, you are not required to wait for it. I will sign the dissolution. I will sign the restitution. I will cooperate with the federal investigation. I will do these things because they are the last things I can do that have any meaning, and because you are the only person in the world in front of whom they will have any meaning. I want that noted. It is noted, Camille said. He looked down at his hands, then up again. May I ask one thing that is not on the page? You may ask. When the estate is rebuilt, he said, and the partnership has closed, and the investigation has taken what it will take from me, and there is a version of you sitting at a table on a Friday afternoon with a glass of wine and no folder in front of you, would you consider then permitting me the smallest and quietest possible seat at that table? Not as a husband, not as a partner, not as anything that has a name, as a chair, in a corner, under your rules. Camille did not answer immediately. She looked past him at the wet skyline, at the long, trembling reflection of the city and the puddled marble at their feet, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that a lesser version of herself, a version she had left behind on a tarmac in California, might have taken pleasure in the answer she was about to give. This version took no pleasure in it. This version simply gave it. No, she said, you may not have a chair, not in a corner, not under my rules, not on a Friday afternoon, not ever. There is no seat in the room I am building that has your shape. There was, at one time, a version of that room in which such a chair existed as a hypothetical, and I gave up that version in a bedroom in Billionaire on the night you announced your Russian wedding. You did not know, at the time, that you were closing that door forever. You do now. It is the last thing about you that I will bother to teach. He lowered his head. He did not argue. Then I will sign, he said again, and I will not ask again. Thank you, Camille said. She stood. The rain came harder. She did not open the coat. The papers will be at your hotel by 7 tomorrow morning. My counsel will attend. Yours may attend or not, as you wish. Do not attempt to see me before or after the signing. Do not attempt to contact me through intermediaries. Do not send flowers. Do not send apologies. Do not send anything at all. When the 90-day audit is complete, I will consider our accounts settled. Until then, we are, technically, still married, and I would ask you to conduct yourself as a man whose wife is watching, because she is. He rose too. He did not extend his hand. He understood, at last, that hands were not on offer. Camille, he said, and it was the first time he had used her name in almost a year. Do not, she said, softly. He nodded once. He turned. He walked to the far end of the rooftop, where the service door opened onto a stairwell, and he did not look back, and she watched him until the door closed behind him, and then she stood in the rain for another full minute, alone, under the heated lamp, and she felt, at last, the thing she had waited 3 years and 11 days to feel. Nothing. She felt nothing, and nothing, tonight, was the exact correct shape of victory. 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon at 3 minutes, Camille Harrington stepped out of a black car in front of the Century City Tower, where her father's dossier had lived for 3 years in a safe she had rented under a name that was not hers. The California sun was the color of hammered brass. The palm trees along the boulevard moved, once, in a slow, warm wind, and were still. She wore the charcoal suit again. Her hair was pulled back again. She carried, under one arm, a single slim folio. Jiang Si-woo was waiting on the sidewalk. He was alone. He wore the same black shirt, the same black trousers, the same Italian shoes. The overcoat was gone. The phone was gone. In his hand, he held a leather portfolio the color of oxblood, and beside him, on the pavement, rested a small locked steel case with a Swiss handle. She had known he would come. She had not, until she saw him, decided whether she would allow him to speak. He did not step forward. He waited until she reached the door of the tower, and then he inclined his head, once, the smallest possible bow, the kind of bow a Korean man of his generation offered to a woman whose authority he had, finally, agreed to recognize. "Miss Harrington," he said. "Mr. Jiang. The contracts are signed, all 3. The Long Beach dissolution filed yesterday. The Federal Cooperation Agreement countersigned this morning at 11. The case at my feet contains a Zurich bearer instrument for the full restituted amount, with the compound interest calculated as your counsel specified, transferable into any escrow you name. My uncle has already left the country. My name will not appear on any indictment that touches you or your family. I have come today, personally, because I promised a woman on a rooftop that when the papers were done, I would not ask for anything again. I am keeping that promise. I have brought one item that was not on the page. It is a request, not for a chair, but for a permission." Camille waited. "I ask permission," Jiang said, quietly, "to hold a single, minority, silent, non-voting position in the shipping consortium your partner is closing on Friday. Not for control, not for information, not for access. For the practical reason that a man in my position, cooperating with a federal investigation, requires a legitimate American legal footprint in order to remain useful to the investigation and, frankly, alive, under your rules, your veto, your terms. If your answer is no, I will withdraw, I will accept whatever consequence follows, and I will not raise the subject again." Camille looked at him for a long moment. She looked past him, at the boulevard, at the palm trees, at the brass-colored sky. She thought about a small office on a 12th floor in Long Beach. She thought about her father's handwriting in the margin of a manifest. She thought about a walnut table on Park Avenue and a rooftop in the rain. Then she looked back at him. "A professional collaboration," she said. "Minority, silent, non-voting, under my counsel's structure, audited quarterly, terminable by me at any time, without cause, no dinners, no calls, no presence in any room I am in unless a boardroom requires it. Are those terms acceptable?" "They are acceptable." "Then you may have that, and nothing else, ever." "I understand." "Do you?" "I do." She held out her hand for the steel case. He set it into her palm. It was heavier than it looked, the way real things are. She turned toward the door of the tower. "Miss Harrington," he said, one last time, and his voice, for the first time in 3 years, was almost a whisper. She paused. She did not turn back. She let him speak to her shoulder, to the line of her hair, to the edge of the charcoal jacket, because that was the entire angle of himself he had ever been permitted to know, and she saw no reason, on this warm afternoon, to grant him any more. "Yes," she said. "You won because you stopped needing me." She considered the boulevard for one more moment. Then she inclined her head, a quarter inch, no more, and she stepped through the door of the tower, and the door closed behind her with the small, clean sound of a chapter ending, and the California sun kept hammering the sidewalk, and Jiang Si-woo stood alone on it for a long time before he, at last, walked slowly away in the opposite direction of every road he had ever taken before. Upstairs, on the 42nd floor, Camille Harrington set the steel case on a glass table, opened the slim folio she had carried in with her, and picked up a pen. Her counsel was waiting. Her partner was waiting. Her father's estate, at last, was waiting. She signed the first page. She signed the second. She signed the third. And when she reached the final page, she did not sign it as Camille Jiang, which had been, for 3 long and instructive years, the name on her passport, on her marriage certificate, on the deeds of a house in Bel Air she would never enter again. She signed it as Camille Harrington, in the same clean, upward slanting hand her father had used, in the same ink he had preferred, on the same brand of paper he had always insisted upon. And when she set the pen down, the room was very quiet, and the light through the window was very gold, and the woman at the table, at last, was home. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever poured tea for someone who mistook your silence for surrender? Have you ever spent years building a dossier in a vault only you could open, while the world watched you smile? What did you finally do the day you stopped needing them to change? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about patience, strategy, and awakening, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.